My name is Alex Easton. For the better part of a decade, I worked as a senior archivist for a major metropolitan museum, a career that sounds far more tranquil than it is. The reality was a life lived under the constant, low, grade assault of the city. The percussive rattle of subway trains vibrating through the floor, the incessant chorus of sirens that were so common they became meaningless background noise, the sheer psychic weight of millions of lives lived in such close, clamoring proximity. I craved silence, not just the absence of noise, but a deep, foundational quiet that I felt I had lost somewhere in my 20s. And so, after a modest inheritance gave me the freedom to do so, I sought it out. My search led me to Havenwood. Tucked away in a fold of rolling hills and dense, old-growth forests, the town was the very picture of rustic serenity. The online listings showed a small, self-contained community with a quaint town square, a single general store, a post office, and a beautiful, stone-built library that made my professional heart ache with longing. It was perfect. I purchased a small, clapboard house on the edge of town, one that backed onto the woods, and imagined a life of quiet research, writing, and listening to the sound of the wind in the pines. For the first 2 weeks, Havenwood was everything I had dreamed of. The quiet was so profound it was almost a physical presence. It settled over the town like a soft blanket, muffling the world. The people were pleasant in a reserved, small-town way. A nod from Mrs. Gable at the general store, a quiet afternoon. From the sheriff, a man whose name I learned was Miller, a brief chat about the weather with my neighbor, Mr. Abernathy, as he meticulously tended his rose bushes. They were polite, but not effusive. Their conversations were brief, their smiles genuine but fleeting. There was a placid, uniform calm to them all, an unruffled quality that I initially mistook for contentment. I began to notice small oddities, the kind of details an archivist is trained to spot. Strange, woven figures, like small, desiccated men made of corn husks and twine, hung from the eaves of many houses, including my own. They were weathered and ancient looking. When I asked Mr. Abernathy about the one on my porch, he simply smiled his placid smile. "Just a bit of town tradition," he'd said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "Brings good fortune." I also noted the curious absence of squirrels and most common birds in the town proper. The woods were alive with them, but it was as if an invisible line had been drawn at the town's edge that they would not cross. These were minor dissonances, easily dismissed as quirks of a secluded community. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in my 3rd week, I heard the siren. It was not the familiar rising and falling wail of a city fire engine or ambulance. This was something else entirely. It began as a low, resonant hum, a vibration I felt in the floorboards and in my teeth before I properly heard it. The hum grew steadily, climbing the scale into a single, piercing, mechanical shriek that was impossibly loud. It was a clean, industrial sound, yet it had a strange, almost organic overtone, a dissonant chord that seemed to scrape at the inside of my skull. It was a sound of pure, undiluted alarm. My first instinct, born of city life, was to look out the window for smoke or signs of panic. I saw neither. Instead, I witnessed something far more unsettling. With a synchronicity that was utterly unnatural, Havenwood simply stopped. Mrs. Gable, who had been sweeping her storefront, calmly put her broom aside, went inside, and locked the door. Mr. Abernathy, who had been on his knees in his garden, stood up, dusted off his trousers, and walked into his house without a backward glance. A delivery truck that had been rumbling down Main Street pulled silently to the curb, its engine cutting out. Within 30 seconds of the siren's first note, the streets were empty. The town was still. The siren blared for exactly 5 minutes. When it cut off, The silence it left behind was absolute, a vacuum that was heavier and more profound than the usual quiet. It was a weighted, listening silence. I stood at my window for a long time, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt exposed, a solitary figure in a ghost town. After another 10 minutes, just as unnervingly synchronized as their disappearance, the people returned, doors unlocked. The delivery truck started its engine. Mrs. Gable resumed her sweeping. It was as if nothing had happened. The next day, I tried to ask about it. My curiosity was simple, unalarming. I was at the general store, buying milk. That was quite a siren yesterday, I said to Mrs. Gable, forcing a casual laugh. Tornado drill. She smiled, the same placid, distant smile as everyone else. Oh, that old thing, she said, her hands busy arranging a display of canned peaches. Don't you pay it any mind. But what is it for? I pressed gently. Is it from the old fire station? It's just something the town does, dear, she replied, her tone one of finality, though it remained perfectly pleasant. A tradition, you could say. Like the figures. I tried the sheriff later that week, catching him as he was getting into his cruiser. Sheriff Miller, I began. I was just wondering about the siren protocol. In case of a real emergency, am I supposed to do anything specific? He turned, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something else in his eyes. Annoyance, or perhaps warning. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the same practiced calm. No protocol to worry about, Mr. Easton. You're safe here in Havenwood. That's the whole point of this place. He gave a short nod, got in his car, and drove away, leaving me standing on the curb with my unanswered question hanging in the air. It was the same everywhere I went. The librarian, a young woman named Clara, simply shook her head with a little smile and changed the subject to a new shipment of books. The postman pretended not to hear me over the sound of his sorting. It was a wall of pleasant, smiling denial. They weren't hostile or secretive in a way that felt aggressive. Their refusal to engage was so gentle, so uniform, it felt like a form of mass gaslighting. They were all reading from the same script, and the core message was that I was the strange one for even asking. After a week of these polite deflections, I started to question my own judgment. Was I being paranoid? Was this some bizarre social test for the new resident, a local joke I wasn't privy to? But the feeling of profound wrongness wouldn't leave me. It lingered, a cold spot in the otherwise warm and welcoming town. The siren sounded again 2 weeks later, exactly the same as before: the rising hum, the 5-minute shriek, the synchronized disappearance of the townsfolk, and the heavy, listening silence that followed. This time, I watched from my upstairs window, my study, which overlooked the woods. As the town fell silent, my eyes were drawn to the forest's edge. I saw nothing, of course, just the deep, dark green of the pines and the shadows gathering beneath them. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the silence wasn't empty. The town wasn't hiding from the siren. They were hiding from what the siren called forth, or perhaps what it kept at bay. That night, unable to sleep, I sat on my porch, the woven husk figure swinging gently in the breeze beside me. It looked like a tiny, screaming man, its twine limbs twisted in silent agony. I had lived in a city where 1,000 sirens a day signaled 1,000 individual tragedies. They were loud, chaotic, and honest. Here there was only one siren. It was clean, orderly, and punctual. And it was built on a foundation of terrifying, unspoken consensus. It was a signal, I was beginning to realize, not of an emergency, but of an agreement. A terrible, recurring appointment that the entire town was complicit in keeping. And the most frightening part was the placid, unwavering silence they maintained about it. It was a silence that felt older and more powerful than any sound, a silence that held the town in its grip. I knew then that I couldn't let it go. I had come to Havenwood seeking quiet, but the quiet I had found was the most horrifying noise of all. My professional life had taught me one fundamental truth: people lie, but paper remembers. Every community, no matter how small or secretive, leaves a trail. Town charters, meeting minutes, census data, local newspapers, these are the bones of a place's history, and I was an expert at articulating their skeletons. The wall of placid denial I'd encountered was social. The archives, I reasoned, would be silent, impartial, and most importantly honest. My investigation began naturally at the stone-built library I had so admired. Clara, the librarian, was behind the circulation desk, stamping books with a rhythmic, peaceful thud. Her smile was as serene as ever when I approached. "Mr. Easton," she greeted me, "looking for a good novel to curl up with?" "Actually, Clara, I was hoping to access the town archives. Specifically, old newspapers from, say, the 1920s and 30s, and any town planning records from that era." The smile didn't falter, but it tightened at the edges. A flicker of something, the same guarded look I'd seen in Sheriff Miller's eyes, passed through her own. "Of course. Our collection is in the basement. I'll have to unlock it for you. Though I should warn you, we had a bit of a flood down there years ago. Some of the older records are in poor condition. A real shame." She led me down a narrow set of wooden stairs into a cool, dry basement that smelled of old paper and dust. It was meticulously organized, far from the water, damaged chaos she had described. Bound volumes of the Havenwood Chronicle were lined up on metal shelves. She unlocked a wire mesh gate for me. "Just lock this up when you're done," she said, her voice still light and airy. "And please be careful. They're very fragile." I spent the next 4 hours surrounded by the ghosts of Havenwood's past. I started with the newspapers. The 1920s were filled with the mundane trivia of small-town life, harvest festivals, church bake sales, local politics. But as I moved into the 1930s, I found the gaps. Not just a missing issue here or there, but entire months gone: October 1934, August 1935, October 1936, a biennial pattern of absence. When I cross-referenced the town meeting minutes, I found the same thing. The records for those corresponding months were neatly sliced out of the ledgers with a razor-sharp blade. It wasn't damage, it was surgical removal. A deliberate, careful erasure. Frustrated, I turned my attention to the town's founding. In a box of miscellaneous documents, I found a copy of the original Havenwood Charter from 1856. It was mostly standard legal boilerplate, but one section, Article the Second, was bizarre. It spoke of the community's duty to uphold cyclical obligations and ensure communal preservation through periodic appeasement. It mentioned a compact with the land itself, a promise to maintain the harmony in exchange for prosperity and protection from the hunger of the wood. It was archaic, unsettling language, more befitting a cult manifesto than a town charter. My search was interrupted by the next siren. It was a Tuesday. I had lost track of the days. The hum started, vibrating up through the concrete floor of the library basement. Upstairs, I heard the gentle thud of the front door being locked. I was alone in the archive, the single bare bulb overhead casting long, dancing shadows. This time, the sound felt different. It wasn't just loud, it was predatory. The dissonant overtone felt like a physical pressure against my ears, a scraping sound that seemed to be searching for a way into my head. I felt a primal urge to hide, to curl up in the darkest corner of the basement and wait it out. Instead, I forced myself up the stairs. The library was empty, bathed in the eerie afternoon light filtering through the tall windows. I crept to the front door and peered through the glass. The street was utterly still, a perfect tableau of a town holding its breath. But my eyes were drawn to the woods at the end of the street. The siren was meant to drive people indoors, to make them hide. But what if its true purpose was to clear the stage for something else? As the siren reached its 5-minute crescendo and cut out, the silence that fell was different. It wasn't just heavy, it was hungry. And in that silence, I heard it. A faint, wet, rhythmic tearing sound coming from the direction of the woods. It was accompanied by a smell that drifted on the air, a coppery, metallic scent like a slaughterhouse, mixed with the cloying sweetness of pine sap. My blood ran cold. It was the sound of feeding. My heart hammered in my chest as I fumbled with the lock on the wire. Mesh gate to the archives. My hands shaking too much to work the key. I left it unlocked and hurried out of the library's back entrance, my mind reeling. The polite smiles, the gentle deflections, they were all a mask for this monstrous, recurring event. The next day, the atmosphere in town had changed. The placid calm was still there, but now it felt brittle, like a sheet of ice over a dark, deep lake. The smiles didn't reach anyone's eyes. The nods were curt. I was no longer just the curious newcomer, I was a threat. I felt their eyes on me as I walked to the general store, their gazes lingering a moment too long. The unspoken consensus had shifted. I had looked behind the curtain, and they knew it. That evening, as dusk settled over the valley, Sheriff Miller's cruiser pulled up to my house. He didn't use his lights or siren. He just appeared, a dark shape in the twilight. He got out of the car and walked slowly to my porch, stopping at the bottom of the steps. He didn't smile. "Mr. Easton," he said, his voice low and even. "I heard you were asking about our town's history. Found your time in the archives. Fruitful." I stood in my doorway, the frame feeling like the only solid thing in the world. "I found some inconsistencies," I said, my own voice tight. Miller nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on mine. "Havenwood is a special place, a quiet place. People come here for that quiet. They respect it. They understand that some things are best left undisturbed. They don't go poking around in basements, asking questions that have no answers." He took a step closer, his hand resting on the butt of his holstered pistol. "You came here seeking quiet, didn't you? I strongly suggest you find it. Stop digging. Because some histories are buried for a reason. And if you dig them up, you might just find yourself buried with them." He held my gaze for a long moment, the threat hanging in the air, as sharp and clear as the siren's shriek. Then he turned, walked back to his cruiser, and drove away, leaving me alone in the deepening darkness. The woven husk figure on my porch swung in the breeze, its silent scream a mirror of my own. I now understood. The siren wasn't a drill or a tradition. It was a dinner bell, and the entire town was dedicated to making sure the meal was served on time. My isolation was no longer just social. It was absolute. I was a loose thread in their perfect, horrifying tapestry, and I had a sinking feeling they were about to pull me. Sheriff Miller's threat was a turning point. The town's mask of pleasantries didn't just slip, it was cast aside. The quiet nods ceased. The fleeting smiles vanished. Now, when I walked down Main Street, I was met with flat, hard stares. Conversations would stop as I approached, resuming in hushed tones only after I had passed. Mr. Abernathy no longer tended his roses. Instead, he seemed to spend his days watching my house from his porch, his stillness more unnerving than any overt action. The quiet I had once craved had become a weapon, a suffocating blanket of communal hostility. I was no longer a resident. I was a specimen under a microscope. My isolation became physical. The day after Miller's visit, my landline went dead. When I tried my cell phone, there was no signal, a problem I'd never had before. I walked to the general store to report it, and Mrs. Gable gave me a thin, pitying look. "Lines must be down," she said, not bothering to check. "Happens out here." My internet flickered and died that afternoon. The next morning, when I tried to start my car to drive to the next town over, the engine wouldn't turn over. It was a systematic, deliberate severing of my connections to the outside world. They were tightening the net, and the dread was a physical weight in my chest, a constant, low hum of terror that mimicked the siren itself. Panic began to set in, a cold, sharp-edged thing. I was trapped. My house, once my sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Driven by a desperate, frantic energy, I began to search it, not for a way out, but for an answer. I was an archivist, and my instincts told me that the history of this place, this house, might hold a clue. I ran my hands along the walls, tapped the floorboards, checked for false backs in closets. It was in the small study upstairs, the room that overlooked the woods, that I found it. A single floorboard beneath the desk was slightly loose. Using the tip of a letter opener, I pried it up. Beneath it, nestled in the dusty space between the joists, was a small, oilskin-wrapped package. My hands trembled as I unwrapped it. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with tight, spidery handwriting. A name was inscribed on the inside cover: Elias Thorne, the man who sold me the house, the man who, according to the realtor, had retired to a warmer climate. The journal began much as my own story had, a man seeking refuge from a noisy world, charmed by Havenwood's serenity. He wrote of the quiet, the polite but distant townsfolk, the strange corn husk figures. Then came his first entry about the siren. His confusion mirrored my own, as did his frustration at the wall of smiling denial. But Elias had been here longer. His paranoia had had more time to fester and grow. He started documenting the siren's schedule, noting its biennial pattern long before I had. He connected it to the gaps in the town's history, the same ones I'd found in the library. October 12th, one entry read, "They are watching me. I see them from the window. They pretend to be gardening, to be fixing their roofs, but they are always watching. They know I have been asking questions. They know I don't belong. The silence is the worst part. It's not empty. It's full of their judgment, their consensus. It presses in on me." Then the journal took a darker turn. Elias wrote about what he called the hum of the earth. He didn't think it was a single creature. He described it as a consciousness in the land itself, a primal hunger that resided in the ancient woods. The siren, he theorized, was a specific harmonic frequency, a key that both called to this entity and placated it, focusing its attention. It was a sound that said, "Here is your due. Be satisfied and leave us in peace." November 3rd, I saw it, or a part of it. After the siren, I hid in the attic and watched the woods. It wasn't a beast of flesh and blood. It was moving earth, roots and soil and wet leaves, shifting into a form that was horribly, vaguely bipedal. It shambled at the edge of the trees, drawn by the siren's echo. The smell, oh God, the smell of rot and fresh blood. It was looking for something. The final section of the journal was where my blood ran truly cold. Elias had finally broken through the town's silence, but not in the way he'd hoped. He'd cornered the librarian, an older woman, not Clara, and demanded answers. And she, perhaps out of pity or a twisted sense of duty, had told him the truth. The siren was a call. The 5 minutes of hiding were a grace period. The tearing sound was the feeding. But the meal wasn't always wild animals. October 20th, he wrote, his handwriting becoming almost illegible. "The harvest, that's what she called it. It's not every time. Only every 2 years. In October. An appeasement," she said, "to ensure the town's prosperity, to keep the harmony. They give it something. Someone, an outsider, someone who doesn't fit. someone who asks too many questions. The corn husk figures aren't just good luck charms, they are effigies, representations. They choose one, and they hang the doll on their door. It's a marker, a designation for the hunger. I dropped the journal. My eyes shot to the front porch, to the small, screaming man of woven husk that had been there since I arrived. It wasn't a welcome gift. It was a label. I was the offering. I was the next appeasement. I snatched the journal back up, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The last few pages were filled with frantic plans for escape, plans that were crossed out one by one. His car battery was dead. His tires were slashed. The phone lines were cut. His story was my own, playing out weeks ahead of me. The final entry was dated October 28th, 2 years ago. The whole town is outside. They're not looking at me with anger. It's worse. They're looking at me with a kind of placid reverence. Miller is at the front of the crowd. He's holding a length of rope. They're not going to kill me. They're just going to tie me to the old oak at the edge of the woods. They're going to leave me for the hump. It's not murder, you see. It's tradition. It's just something the town does. I can hear it now. Not the siren, not yet, but the low hum, starting in the earth, coming for. The sentence was unfinished. A wave of nausea and terror washed over me. I stumbled to my study window and looked at the calendar on my desk. My finger traced the date. Tuesday, October 28th, the exact date of Elias Thorne's last entry 2 years later. My 2-week grace period was over. This wasn't just another siren day. This was the harvest. And as the full, horrifying weight of that realization crashed down upon me, I felt it. A low, deep vibration, starting in the soles of my feet and rising up through the floorboards. It was a familiar feeling, the feeling of the siren waking up. But this time, I knew what it meant. It wasn't a dinner bell for some random beast. It was a personalized invitation, and my name was on the menu. The hum grew louder, the first note of the shriek beginning to form in the air, a clean, piercing sound that promised not just alarm, but annihilation. The siren's shriek was no longer just a sound in the air, it was a physical force, a needle of pure vibration driving into my skull. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. My limbs felt like lead, my thoughts fractured into 1,000 shards of terror. Through the window, I saw them. The people of Havenwood were emerging from their homes, but not to hide. They were gathering. They moved with a slow, deliberate purpose, their faces empty of emotion, their eyes fixed on my house. Sheriff Miller was at the front, a thick coil of rope in his hand. Beside him, Mr. Abernathy held a rusty-looking iron lantern. Mrs. Gable, Clara, the postman, they were all there, a silent, placid congregation assembling for a holy rite. Elias's final, unfinished sentence echoed in my mind coming for. They weren't going to break down the door and drag me out. That would be too chaotic, too disruptive to the harmony. They were going to wait. They would stand there, their collective will a tangible pressure, until I came out to meet my fate. The siren was for me. The 5-minute duration wasn't a grace period for them to hide, it was a countdown for me to surrender. My archivist's mind, so used to finding order in chaos, was failing me. There was no logic here, no record to consult, only the raw, primal truth of the journal clutched in my hand. They're just going to tie me to the old oak. I wouldn't let that happen. I wouldn't be a placid sacrifice. My house backed onto the woods. It was my only chance, a desperate, suicidal gamble, to flee the shepherds and run directly into the wolf's maw. With a surge of adrenaline, fueled defiance, I scrambled for the back of the house. I could hear the floorboards of the front porch creaking as the first of them took up their positions. I fumbled with the lock on the kitchen door, my hands slick with sweat, and threw it open. I burst out into the cool October air and sprinted across the small, unkempt lawn towards the tree line. I didn't look back. I couldn't bear to see their faces, to see if they were pursuing me or simply watching, knowing the woods would do their work for them. I plunged into the forest just as the siren cut out. The silence that fell was instantaneous and absolute. It was a physical blow, a crushing weight that stole the air from my lungs. Every sound I made, my ragged breaths, the snap of twigs under my feet, the frantic pounding of my own heart, was an obscenity in this sacred, hungry quiet. The woods were dark, the canopy of ancient pines swallowing the last of the afternoon light. I ran blindly, stumbling over roots, my face whipped by low, hanging branches. Then I heard it, not with my ears, but with my whole body, a low, rhythmic shifting. The wet, tearing sound from my memory, but magnified closer. The air grew thick with the smell of damp soil, of rot, and the coppery tang of old blood. It was the smell of the earth itself, turning over in its sleep, and it was waking up. I risked a glance over my shoulder. Through the trees, I could see the faint, flickering glow of Mr. Abernathy's lantern. They were following, not with haste, but with the slow, inexorable patience of pallbearers. They were herding me deeper into the woods, towards the heart of the hunger. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning. The ground beneath my feet felt soft, spongy, and unnaturally yielding. I looked down and saw that the soil was dark and loose, crawling with a lattice of pale, thick roots that seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. I stumbled, catching myself on the trunk of a massive oak, the old oak from Elias's journal. Its bark was scarred with deep gouges, and dark stains soaked the earth around its base. That's when I saw it. It wasn't a creature of flesh and bone that rose from the ground before me. It was the ground itself. Soil, leaf litter, and a writhing mass of pale roots coalesced, heaving upward into a form that was a grotesque parody of a man. It had no face, only a dark, gaping hollow where a mouth should be. Limbs of twisted wood and packed earth scraped against each other as it shambled towards me. The tearing sound the friction of its own impossible body. It was the hum of the earth, the hunger of the wood, the guardian of heavenwood's terrible harmony. I was paralyzed, my defiance extinguished and replaced by a terror so profound it was almost transcendent. This was not a monster to be fought. It was a geological event. It was a fundamental law of this place, as inescapable as gravity. It reached for me with a limb of woven roots. I didn't scream. The sound was trapped in my throat, a knot of pure fear. As the roots touched my leg, I felt no pain, only a strange, pulling cold. The roots burrowed into my skin, not tearing but merging. I felt myself being drawn down into the soft, hungry earth. My body began to come apart, not in a spray of blood and gore, but in a quiet, horrifying dissolution. My flesh became soil, my bones became roots, my blood became the dark sap of the forest. My consciousness, stretched thin and unraveling, was pulled into the collective. I felt Elias Thorne there, and countless others before him, their terror and confusion a permanent echo in the soil. I felt the town, their placid satisfaction a distant, steady pulse. They were the keepers, we were the sustenance. This was the compact. This was the price of their peace. My last coherent thought was of the city I had fled. I had hated its noise, its chaos, its clamoring, vibrant life. I had come to Havenwood seeking quiet. As my vision dissolved into a swirling darkness of earth and root, and my sense of self was finally consumed by the great, silent hum, I realized I had found it. They say some memories are so terrifying your mind buries them deep, but mine resurfaced with a vengeance last Halloween. It all started on Halloween night in 1993. A family driving to Cheyenne spotted me, a 10-year-old girl in a skeleton costume. wandering alone on a desolate Wyoming road. I was disoriented and confused, telling them I was trying to get back to my hometown, Ataraxia Springs. The father checked his map, his brow furrowing. There was no such town. That was me, lost and alone. The police documented everything, but no one could explain how I ended up there. No missing child reports matched my description, and despite giving them my parents' names and phone number, the police never found them. My story about that night was dismissed as the ramblings of a traumatized child. After years of therapy, I even started to doubt it myself. They convinced me I'd probably been kidnapped, maybe even born into that horrific life, and my mind had created a fantasy world to cope. I learned to accept that when memories clash with reality, it's the memories that are faulty. But last week, something happened that shattered those years of therapeutic certainty. Now, I have to share my story again, partly to reclaim those memories, to make them real by putting them into words, but also to connect with anyone else who might be out there, harboring a strange, old memory that feels more real than a dream. Some of what I'm about to tell you comes from a diary entry I wrote after that Halloween night, but most of it is seared into my memory. I remember Ataraxia Springs vividly. It was a small town built around an old tuberculosis sanatorium, abandoned after the discovery of antibiotics in the late 1920s. We learned all about it in school. The town was obsessed with its history. The sanatorium still stood, a decaying relic across the lake. Older kids whispered ghost stories about it, tales told around campfires on the beach. The sanatorium's shadow looming across the water like a skeletal finger. Aside from that, Ataraxia Springs was your typical American town. My parents, not the foster parents I ended up with, but the ones who vanished, were loving. My older sister, Marjorie, and I had a happy childhood in a nice neighborhood. As far as I can recall, life was ordinary. Until that night. Halloween was a big deal for us kids. Everyone competed to have the best costume. This year, I was thrilled with the skeleton suit my dad had bought me. Marjorie was a teenager, a bit old for trick or treating, but she'd promised to take me so our parents could stay home and hand out candy and probably enjoy some peace and quiet. Everything was going fine until Marjorie's punk friends showed up on their bikes. Ryan, Johnny, and Ashley. They had a reputation, troublemakers, everyone said, and they loved to tease me. "Hey, Marjorie!" Ryan shouted. "Babysitting tonight of all nights." He went on about how they were going to the sanatorium. It was the perfect night for it, he said, and it was a shame she had me, tied around her ankle like a shackle. I was already scared, staring up at their bikes at the end of the Cul D. Saca street that curves in a circle with only one way in or out. I knew what was coming. I grabbed Marjorie's hand, pleading with my eyes. Back then, even though she was just a teenager, I saw her as almost an adult. She hesitated, and after some back and forth, it was decided I was going with them. "Simon, Melissa," she said, and my stomach dropped. "What's the worst that could happen? It'll be fun, like an adventure in one of your favorite movies." I protested, but she told me not to be a crybaby. She didn't want to miss out on their adventure, or on time with Ryan, I guess. I felt like a burden, a fifth wheel. Marjorie left me with her friends while she went to get her bike. Those few minutes felt like hours. Ryan lit a cigarette with his Zippo, the flame illuminating his sneer. I couldn't fathom what Marjorie saw in him. With his black mohawk, combat boots, and leather jacket with "FUCKYOU" painted on the back, he looked more like a Disney villain than a prince. Marjorie was nothing like him. She was popular, kind, everything I wanted to be. It made no sense. I wanted to run home and tell Mom, but that would just lead to a fight. Marjorie put me on the seat of her bike, and told me to hold on tight. We took the shortcut through the woods, the bumpy ride making my heart pound even faster. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood orange and bruised purple. Their laughter echoed through the trees, harsh and unsettling. I was angry at Marjorie and at myself for letting her drag me along. The lake was eerily still, reflecting the darkening sky. They left their bikes on the beach, and Marjorie, holding my hand tightly, followed the others to the old boathouse. I avoided looking at the sanatorium across the lake, its silhouette rising from the trees like a gothic nightmare. Inside the boathouse, an old rowboat waited. The wind was picking up, sending ripples across the water that lapped against the boat. I hated deep water. I could swim, but if I couldn't touch the bottom, panic seized me. Being trapped in a rickety rowboat with these punks was not my idea of fun. I clung to Marjorie's jacket as Ryan shoved us away from the dock and took the oars. The boat rocked with each stroke, and I squeezed my eyes shut, fear a cold knot in my stomach. Marjorie's friends, especially Ashley, seemed to enjoy my terror. "Lots of kids have drowned in this lake," she said with a cruel laugh. "Something lives down there, feeds on little girls like you. Let's hope it's sleeping tonight." "Don't be mean," Marjorie said. "I don't believe in any of that." "Still, weird stuff happens around here," Johnny chimed in. "My dad told me about a couple who disappeared by the lake 20 years ago. They were never found. Maybe they just ditched this boring town," Ryan said with a smirk. "Yeah, but that's not the weirdest part," Johnny continued, his voice low. "While they were searching for them, they found this old, naked guy wandering in the woods. He claimed he was the guy who disappeared, but he was way too old. They never got any answers from him, though. He hung himself in his cell before they could question him. My dad found him, hanging from the top bunk. A shiver ran down my spine. We reached the other side of the lake, the air thick with the stench of rotting seaweed and something foul I couldn't place. Dead reeds crunched under our feet as we stepped ashore. Ducks quacked and scattered, disturbed by our arrival. The sky rumbled ominously. This was the first time any of us had been on this side of the lake, and even Marjorie couldn't hide her nervousness. Ryan, however, seemed oblivious, lighting another cigarette. "Let's go," he said, his eyes gleaming with a strange excitement. "I've always wanted to see this place up close." We followed him up an overgrown path. Something rustled in the bushes, and I instinctively grabbed Marjorie's hand. "Ghouls," Ryan said with a chilling grin. "Don't get too close." "Don't listen to him," Marjorie said, her voice a little shaky. "It's just birds." But I was terrified. It wasn't just the sounds, it was the whole atmosphere. Something felt wrong, off-key. The leaves seemed abnormally large, the trees impossibly tall, the sky heavy with malice. The courtyard was choked with weeds pushing through the gravel. We approached the entrance, my steps slow and reluctant. "Can't we go back now?" I whispered to Marjorie. "Do we have to go inside?" The doors were locked. Ryan rattled them violently, but they wouldn't budge. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Ryan was determined. We trudged through the overgrown grounds until we found a small, rusty door on the other side of the building. It looked like it hadn't been used in decades. To my dismay, it was unlocked. The moment we stepped inside and closed the door behind us, the storm intensified. Rain lashed against the building, and thunder boomed like an angry giant. Ryan flicked his Zippo, the tiny flame revealing a damp, musty corridor. The walls were scrawled with faded graffiti. Ryan held his lighter closer to one message, sprayed in blood red paint. "If you close the door, it's already too late." "What's that supposed to mean?" Johnny asked, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Ashley, suddenly scared, tried the door. It wouldn't open. Guys, I can't get it open, she yelled, panic rising in her voice. Help me. Ryan and Johnny joined her, but the door remained stubbornly shut. Marjorie. I looked up at my sister, my voice trembling. What's happening? I'm afraid. I don't know. She stammered, her eyes wide with fear. It was unlocked a second ago, Ashley shrieked. Everyone was yelling at once, panic filling the small space. Ryan's voice cut through the chaos. No, he roared. Well, find another way out, maybe through the main entrance. Worst case, we climb out a window. Just chill. Marjorie seemed to calm down a bit, but Ashley was still frantic. This place is giving me the creeps, she said, her voice trembling. Like a wave of dread just washed over me. I feel it too, Marjorie whispered. You're all freaking out over nothing, Ryan scoffed. Get a grip. Frustration boiled over inside me. It's your fault, I yelled at Ryan. You shouldn't be bossing us around. This was your stupid idea. Shut up, Melissa. Marjorie snapped, her cheeks flushed. What? I retorted. Mom's right, your friends are a bad influence. Shut up, Marjorie yelled again. Ryan just laughed. It's okay. She's just scared. Moms suck, Johnny added with a nervous grin. Mine's always on my case about everything. I crossed my arms, fuming. Well, if you'd listened to your mom, maybe we wouldn't be trapped here. We're not trapped, Ryan insisted, leading the way down the dark corridor. We wandered through the cellar for what felt like hours, the only light coming from Ryan's flickering Zippo. Finally, we found a staircase, but it didn't lead to the main floor. Instead, we emerged into a ward filled with rows of old iron beds. The windows were too high for us to reach. Each thunderclap rattled the glass, sending shivers down my spine. Johnny pointed towards one of the beds. Unlike the others, it wasn't empty. We approached cautiously. Marjorie shielded my eyes as we got closer, but I could hear the gasps and Ashley's terrified scream. She's been dead for decades, Johnny said, his voice hushed. Mummified? Oh my God! Ashley shrieked. She's wearing my watch. Your watch. Ryan sounded incredulous. That's a coincidence. What does it mean? Ashley interrupted, her voice frantic. Why is she wearing my watch? We need to get out of here, Marjorie said, her voice shaking. We need to call the police. Where's the rest of her body? Johnny asked, his voice trembling. It looks like it was ripped. No, Ashley sobbed. It's not a coincidence, it's my watch! But you're still wearing it, Ryan said, bewildered. Marjorie's right. We need to report this. We fled the room, our hearts pounding. I know I'm wearing my watch, Ashley cried, clinging to Johnny. But hers had the same crack in the glass, everything. I know it doesn't make sense, but that was my watch! What does it mean? It doesn't mean anything, Ryan said, trying to sound reassuring. Just a freak coincidence. We continued our search for an exit, but the building seemed to twist and turn back on itself like a maze. My legs ached and fear gnawed at me. By now, our parents must have been worried sick. I felt a pang of guilt for disobeying them. If only I'd known I'd never see them again. We found a small library, its shelves still lined with decaying books. I sank onto a dusty divan next to Marjorie. Are we going to die? I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. No, she said, trying to sound brave. It's just an old building. We just need to find. What's this? Ashley interrupted, holding up a golden sphere the size of a cannonball. It's beautiful and heavy. If it's real gold, it must be worth a fortune. We gathered around her, mesmerized by the sphere's smooth, reflective surface. That's when we heard it, a crash from down the hall, followed by a scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. It was moving towards us. What the hell is that? Johnny whispered, his eyes wide with fear. Ryan, go check it out. Ryan hesitated, clearly torn between bravado and fear. He glanced at Marjorie, and she shook her head. Then we heard it. The most horrifying sound I've ever heard. A grotesque cooing mixed with a wheezing, snickering laugh, like an old witch choking on a bone. "No way," Ryan said, his voice shaking. "I'm not going out there." We retreated to the next room, a recreation room with a pool table. Ashley clutched the golden sphere. Another crash echoed from the library. It sounded like the door, maybe even the wall, had been ripped apart. The cooing and snickering grew louder, closer. It sounded excited, like a predator that had cornered its prey. We huddled behind Ryan, peering into the library. A shadow stretched across the floor, followed by an enormous, gray hand with black claws. We screamed and backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The hand gripped the floorboards and pulled, dragging the rest of the creature into view. "Help me!" Ryan yelled, grabbing books from a nearby shelf and setting them alight with his Zippo. Johnny joined him, tossing the flaming books towards the creature. It was a horrifying sight. A giant, hairless head with long, spindly arms attached to its temples. Its eyes were enormous, golden spheres, reflecting our terrified faces. It let out a guttural coo and licked its gray lips with a long, black tongue. It lunged towards us, but the flames held it back. "Come on!" Ryan shouted. "Let's go!" Marjorie scooped me up and ran, but Ashley was too slow. The creature grabbed her legs, pulling her towards its gaping maw. Her screams echoed through the hallway as its teeth tore through her flesh. Johnny lunged forward and grabbed Ashley's hands, pulling until the remaining tendons snapped. We dragged her away, leaving a trail of blood, and stumbled into another ward. Ryan and Johnny laid her on a bed. The sheets were quickly soaked red. "We're back," she whispered, her voice faint. "Can't you see?" "No," Johnny sobbed. "We'll get you to a hospital." The cooing echoed in the hallway, closer now. "No," Ashley whispered, her eyes fluttering closed. "This is it. I love you. Go." Johnny kissed her face as she lost consciousness. No, no, no. "I love you too. We have to go," Marjorie cried, pulling Ryan away from Ashley's bedside. The creature spat something out that landed with a thud outside the door. One of the golden spheres. It cooed again, the sound hungry and close. We ran, blindly, desperately. More hallways, more staircases, more rooms. But no exit. The building seemed to stretch on forever, an impossible labyrinth. The cooing faded. We slowed down, gasping for breath. Marjorie, exhausted, put me down. "This place goes on forever," Johnny said, despair in his voice. "It's a nightmare. We're just running in circles. That message on the wall, it was right. Too late!" My God. Ashley, it was really her we saw back there, wasn't it? "There's a way out," Ryan insisted, his voice hollow. "What is this place?" Marjorie whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "The laws of nature don't apply here. And that thing, are there more of them? It's like something straight out of hell." It spat out one of those golden balls. "Did you see? Hell is a place on earth," Ryan muttered, fumbling with a cigarette. His hands were shaking too much to light it. "Those golden spheres, they're like its eyes. It spits them out to see further. It appeared after we found the first one, and it got faster after it spat out the second." I screamed. "What is it?" Marjorie cried. "Bugs," I yelled, pointing to a crack in the floor. Hundreds of tiny black beetles with green spots swarmed around it. I hated bugs. "It's okay," Marjorie said, trying to soothe me. "Just don't step on them." "I've never seen bugs like that before," I said, my voice trembling. We pressed on, the cooing growing louder again, echoing from multiple directions. We reached a large, empty swimming pool. Several golden spheres glimmered at the bottom, bathed in an eerie moonlight that streamed through the high windows. I cried out again, but not because of the cooing. Something was moving in the shadows above us, unfurling like a grotesque flower. More of those heads. Johnny whispered, his voice filled with dread. Can you hear it? What is that thing? Ryan whispered, his voice hoarse. One by one, 8 long, spindly legs emerged from the shadow, followed by a decaying human torso. It was like a monstrous spider, its legs carrying the rotting corpse. We ran, skirting the edge of the pool, heading for the door on the other side. The spider scuttled down the wall, its legs clicking against the tiles, and pursued us. Holy shit! Johnny yelled. Oh God, no! The spider lunged, one of its legs narrowly missing me. We scrambled through the door, which, thankfully, was too small for the creature to follow. That was close! Ryan gasped, his breath coming in ragged pants. No, no, no! Johnny whimpered, tears streaming down his face. How is this possible? It can't be! We got away! Ryan said, his voice strained. Let's just hope we don't end up back. It's not that, Johnny cried, pointing a trembling finger back towards the pool room. The body, the dead body attached to those legs. It was wearing my jacket! Oh God, no! Maybe it doesn't have to happen like that, Marjorie said, her voice filled with a desperate hope. Maybe we can avoid it. Didn't work out so well for Ashley, did it? Johnny sobbed. And how do you avoid something like that? We don't even know how it happens. Calm down, Ryan said, trying to take charge. Let's focus on getting out of here. I feel a breeze. Do you feel it? He was right. A faint breeze was wafting down the corridor. Hoping it led to an exit, we followed it. But it wasn't the escape we were looking for. It led to a large balcony with open French doors. We stepped out onto the balcony, and a collective gasp escaped our lips. I told you, Marjorie whispered, her voice filled with horror. We're in hell. Before us stretched a landscape of flesh and bone, pulsating under a crimson sky. The ground itself seemed to breathe, and the trees read like living things. Monstrous creatures stalked the terrain, their roars echoing across the horrifying expanse. The air was thick with the stench of rot and sulfur. Slowly, a dark, gaseous planet with swirling violet clouds rose in the sky like a malevolent moon. The creatures below howled in response. I don't know about hell, Ryan said, his voice barely a whisper. But it's sure as hell isn't Earth. Millions of those black beetles with green spots erupted from the ground, swarming towards the monstrous planet. A few landed on the balcony. Johnny sneezed violently, then clutched at his face in a panic. Fuck, he screamed. It crawled up my nose. Seriously, Ryan asked, his voice filled with disbelief. I can feel it in my sinuses. Johnny cried, trying to blow it out. Help me. I think it's eating its way. He swayed, his voice growing faint. Let's get back inside, Ryan said, and we rushed back into the hallway. But it was too late for Johnny. He collapsed, convulsing and foaming at the mouth. Marjorie picked me up, her face pale with terror. Ryan knelt beside Johnny, trying to help, but there was nothing he could do. Johnny's body jerked and spasmed, his back arching unnaturally. Ryan scrambled back, his eyes wide with horror. Then, as suddenly as it started, the seizure stopped. Johnny's eyes fluttered open. What happened? He mumbled. Why am I on the floor? Are you okay, man? Ryan asked, relief flooding his voice. I thought you were a goner. Marjorie didn't look convinced. She backed away, holding me close. Yeah, Johnny said, attempting to sit up. I feel fine, but that was weird. He froze, his eyes widening in horror. He screamed, clutching at his back. Blood seeped through his fingers. His screams intensified as his jacket ripped open, and a slimy, black leg erupted from his flesh. He begged us to help, his face contorted in agony. But we could only watch in helpless terror. One by one, the legs burst from his back, their sharp tips tearing through his clothes and skin. He tried to crawl away, but the legs wouldn't let him. They straightened, lifting him off the ground. "Help me!" he screamed as the legs carried him away. "No, don't let it happen! Please help me!" He reached for us, his fingers grasping at the air. "I'm still alive!" There must be a way. The legs carried him up the wall and into another hallway. "No!" he cried, his voice growing fainter. "Please, no!" We stood frozen, listening to his fading screams, the echoes of his final sobs. "Mom, I'm scared! Mom!" The cooing intensified, urging us onward. Standing still meant certain death. Marjorie, clutching my hand, stayed close to Ryan. We stumbled into a small room with an old piano against the wall. It was a dead end, but behind the piano, a flickering light beckoned. Marjorie peered behind the instrument. "It's a way out!" she whispered excitedly. "I can't see where it leads, but it smells like fresh air!" "Really?" I cried, a surge of hope coursing through me. "Can we finally get out of?" My words were cut short by a thud outside the room. One of the golden spheres rolled into view. "Help me move the piano," Marjorie yelled. "Ryan, now!" They struggled to move the heavy instrument, the creature's cooing growing louder as it approached. I screamed as it appeared in the doorway, its golden eyes fixed on us. With a final heave, they pushed the piano against the door, blocking it. It wouldn't hold for long, but maybe it would buy us some time. Marjorie grabbed my hand, but Ryan wasn't so lucky. The creature reached over the piano and snatched him, pulling him into the hallway. He had only a moment to speak, and he chose his words carefully. "I love you, Marjorie," he said, his voice filled with a love he'd never expressed before. I looked away, unable to bear witness to his gruesome end. The flickering light behind the piano widened, becoming a swirling vortex of colors. It wasn't a hole, but a rip in reality. I glimpsed a forest on the other side, then a desert, then a beach, the images flashing by in a dizzying blur. The creature pushed against the piano, forcing it back. There was no time to hesitate. Marjorie picked me up and threw me through the rift. I landed on soft earth, in a forest shrouded in darkness. I saw the rift hanging in the air, Marjorie about to jump through, the creature's hand reaching for her. Then, in a flash, it was gone. I stumbled through the woods, desperate to find my way home to Ataraxia Springs. The rest, as they say, is history. They convinced me my story was a fabrication, a coping mechanism for some unimaginable trauma. But now, I believe the real coping mechanism was letting them convince me it never happened. Last week, a man came to my door with a letter. He'd found it among his great-grandmother's belongings in Paris. The envelope reads, "To be delivered to my sister, Melissa Johansson, in case she's ever found after I'm gone." My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter was dated 1970. Tears streamed down my face as I read Marjorie's words. She had appeared in Wyoming in 1889, she wrote, claiming to be from a town called Ataraxia Springs. She had lived a full life, surviving 2 world wars, witnessing incredible changes. She had married, had a son she named Ryan, and spent her days searching for me. "She never told anyone about you," the man said. I thought it was a story, or maybe a sign of mental illness. But then I found those old reports about a girl in Wyoming who claimed to be from Ataraxia Springs. It can't be a coincidence, can it? I sobbed, tears of grief and relief. I would never see Marjorie again, but she had escaped that nightmarish place. She had lived. The letter ended with these words. "All these years, and I still think of you every day. I miss you." And between my sobs, I whispered, "I miss you too. I should probably tell you what I know about the deep web. It's this hidden part of the internet you can only get to using special software, like Tor. Everyone's anonymous there, making it almost impossible to track anyone. That's why it's a haven for drug deals and even worse stuff. I knew it was illegal to even look at the deep web, but I did it anyway. And man, did I regret it. I was just chilling on my bed, browsing some deep websites. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't into anything crazy like a lot of people there. I stayed away from the really disturbing stuff. I mostly just looked at the drug sites because they were kind of fascinating in a weird way. I never bought anything, but I got a thrill from doing something I shouldn't. I know it sounds dumb, but it's true. My girlfriend Liz came out of the bathroom, drying her hair with a towel. She looked amazing without any makeup on. We'd been living together for about a year in a decent apartment, and things were going pretty well for both of us. She was almost finished with nursing school, and I had a good job with benefits. I was even planning to propose to her on Christmas, which was only a month away. She sat next to me and peeked at my screen. "Are you on that creepy deep web thing again?" she asked. I nodded. "You know, you're going to get in trouble if you keep messing around with that," she said, giving me a little scolding as she opened her book. "I don't want my boyfriend ending up in jail." I laughed. "Don't worry, babe. I know what I'm doing. I'll be fine." She kissed me on the cheek. "Okay, I guess I trust you." I kept browsing and found this site I'd never seen before. It was a drug marketplace called Cannabis Coral. What a lame name, right? The site was boring, so I clicked off it. But then this chat box popped up on my screen. It said, "Aren't you going to purchase something from the Cannabis Coral?" I'd seen these kinds of messages before. Usually, if you just said no thanks, they'd leave you alone. So that's what I did. But then he replied, "Why not?" For some reason, I decided to be a smart aleck and typed, "Because your selection sex. That's why it took him a while to answer, but when he did, I burst out laughing. He wrote, "I have your address. I have your phone number. Hell, I even have your credit card number. Buy something from the Cannabis Coral ORELSE." I rolled my eyes. "Yeah, right, I'm so scared," I thought. I typed back, "Do you also have my embarrassing middle school yearbook photos? Get lost, dude." Then he just said, "Don't say I didn't warn you." A few days later, I'd totally forgotten about it. I was just going about my normal day, doing the usual stuff. The best part of my day was always when I got to be with Liz, if you know what I mean. We'd just finished having some fun when I heard a weird knocking sound coming from the window. Knock, knock. Knock. Liz was scared. "Honey, did you hear that?" K-N-O-K. I wasn't really into guns, but when I moved in with Liz, her dad made me get one to protect her. I didn't even know what kind it was. I ran to the closet and grabbed it from its hiding spot. It felt heavy and awkward in my hands. I'd only shot it once at a shooting range, and I was a terrible shot. But if some crazy person was outside, I was ready to use it. I crept to the window and peeked outside. Liz hadn't wanted a first-floor apartment, but I convinced her it was a good idea because it was cheaper. Now I was starting to think she was right. I was relieved to see nobody there. "It must have been those teenagers upstairs," I said, trying to sound calm. "Those little punks." Suddenly, the door flew open. This terrifying guy walked in. He was dressed in black, with a mask covering his face, and he was holding a huge machete. He looked at me and then went straight for Liz. "If you even touch that gun, I'll kill her right now," he growled. Liz shook her head as he gagged her, grabbed her, and held the machete to her throat. Her eyes were wide with terror. That's when it hit me, the Cannabis Coral. He was serious about knowing everything about me. "What do you want?" "Do you want me to buy some drugs?" I asked. "I'll do anything. Just please don't hurt her. She has nothing to do with this." "I gave you a warning," he said. but I'm feeling generous, so I'll give you a chance to get her back. I took a deep breath. How much money do you want? He laughed this awful laugh. I don't want your money. I want to play a game. A game. He nodded. A scavenger hunt. I'll give you clues to where I've hidden her. If you find her within 10 days, she lives. If you don't, she dies. Simple as that. And don't even think about calling the police or telling anyone, or you lose. I know everything about you. I can track your every move. Understand? I gulped. If I did anything stupid, he'd kill Liz. I had no choice but to play his game. Yes, I understand, I said. Good, he said, walking toward the door with Liz. I'll text you the first clue in an hour. Until then, stay here. And just like that, he was gone, taking Liz with him. I can help you with that. Here's the revised text with simpler language and a more natural flow. 30 minutes later, my phone buzzed. I was still glued to the floor, trying to process what had happened. I pulled out my phone and saw a new text from an unknown number. Go to Stu's diner and wait for instructions. It's about an hour away. See Coral. It was finally hitting me. See Coral, as I'd call him, had control of both our lives. I stared at the message for 10 minutes before replying. Is there any way to get Liz back now? I'll do anything. Torture me instead of her. Come on, give me some credit. She's innocent. You, on the other hand, need a lesson. If you lose, Liz will have a quick, painless death. Yours, not so much. Now stop whining and go to the diner. I stood up, my heart pounding, legs shaking and head throbbing. I had 10 days to save Liz, and every minute counted. I grabbed my coat, gun, phone, wallet, and keys, and rushed out of the apartment. The cold November air made me shiver. My old Jeep offered little warmth. I remembered Liz warning me about getting a Jeep in Washington's cold weather, but I ignored her. Idiot, I thought. If only I'd listened to Liz and stayed away from the deep web. I plugged Stu's diner into my GPS and groaned. See, Coral wasn't making this easy. The diner was near the Misery Forest, a creepy place with dark rumors. I cursed See Coral and hit the road. The early morning roads were empty. I thought about happier times, like the day I fell in love with Liz on a beach in Santa Monica. Her laughter, her smile. She was amazing. I knew she'd probably dump me if we survived this. Who would want to date someone who almost got them killed? And the thought of losing her, I couldn't bear it. The Misery Forest had a dirt road cutting through it. I tried to find another route, but there was none. The rumors about the forest seemed true. I heard strange noises and even saw a creepy shadow move in the trees. I laughed at myself for being so scared. I found the diner, a rundown brick building hidden in the woods. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside. The place was dark and dusty. I did some research and found out it was an old tourist spot with a dark history, including a murder. Suddenly, the lights flickered on, and creepy music played. A man in a suit walked out of the bathroom. He put a plate with 3 shot glasses on the table. Sorry, who are you? I asked. Are you with See Coral? He's my boss, the man said in a deep voice. Text him to say you're ready for the first challenge. I texted See Coral, and he replied with a trivia game. Get 2 right and I'd get a clue. Get 1 wrong and I'd drink poison. The first question was a spelling test. I was terrible at spelling. I guessed C and got it right. The second question was about the capital of West Virginia. I guessed wrong. The man pointed a gun at me. 10 seconds to choose a drink, he said. I had to pick one and fast. I chose the one on the right. I drank it and it was water. I texted See Coral, I'm still alive. Good. I have more challenges for you. My guy will give you the first clue. The man gave me a key and an address in Maine. Go to this address and use the key. More instructions will be there. I left the diner, relieved to be alive. I had survived this round, and I was determined to save Liz. But I had no idea what horrors awaited me in Maine. The man with the machete led me to his car, ignoring my struggles. He unlocked the back door, took the gag off, and tossed the machete onto the seat. I thought about grabbing it and attacking him as he ordered me into the car. I got in, surprised he didn't tie me up. When he walked around to the driver's seat, I grabbed the machete. It was plastic. He laughed as he got in. Pretty cool? Ha! Fooled a lot of people with this thing. My escape plan was ruined. He pulled off his mask. Instead of a monster, he was actually really handsome. Surprised, he asked. "Who are you?" I asked, still wary. "Call me C," he said, starting the car. He drove towards Seattle, glancing at me in the rearview mirror every few seconds. It felt like he was reading my mind. "Are you going to hurt me?" I asked, scared. "Only if your boyfriend loses the game," C said. "Until then, you're safe." "Why are you so angry at Todd?" I asked. "He was rude on the deep web," C said, hiding behind anonymity to say things he wouldn't say in person. "Like what?" "He said my cannabis store had a bad selection." Todd could be such an idiot. "Can I do anything to make it up to you?" I asked. "Just behave," C said. "I have to pretend you're my crazy sister when we get to my place. It's a whole thing." "What do you do?" I asked. "I'm a model," he said. "I make good money." "Then why sell drugs?" "For the thrill." He parked at a fancy condo, and I followed him to the elevator. "How many times have you done this game?" I asked. 15. "You and Todd are number 16. Has anyone ever won?" "Nope," he said proudly. The elevator stopped. "So I'm going to die. No faith in your boyfriend?" he asked, walking down the hall. "Not really," I admitted. He opened the door to his condo. The view of Seattle was amazing. "Want to see your room?" he asked. I hesitated. "Relax, I won't hurt you," he said. "It's just past the kitchen." The room was beautiful, like something from a magazine. But then I saw the photos on the wall. 15 women, all around my age, with forced smiles. Some had been crying. "Smile," C said, holding up a camera. I glared at him. "Smile." "No," he yelled. I forced a smile. He seemed happy. "Let's watch Titanic," he said. "Do I have a choice?" No. I sat on the couch, avoiding his eyes. He even complained about Jack not getting on the door with Rose. Later, he checked his phone. "Your boyfriend is an idiot," he said. "Why?" "He thought the capital of West Virginia was West Virginia City." C yawned. "Time for bed. We have a busy day tomorrow." "What are we doing?" I asked. "Going to Maine." "I need to be there for Todd's final challenge," he said. "Now come on. I have to lock you in." He locked me in the bedroom. There was no phone and only a small window high up on the wall. I couldn't escape. I put on the pajamas I found in the dresser and cried myself to sleep. "Todd, you better save me," I thought. "So you don't have any luggage?" I groaned. "For the last time, no. My plane leaves in 10 minutes and I have to be on it. Can I please go?" The security guard raised an eyebrow. "Look, kid, I've been doing this job a long time and you seem suspicious." "What's that supposed to mean?" "You haven't showered. You're covered in dirt. There's a leaf in your hair and you're flying across the country without any bags. Of course I'm suspicious." I shrugged. "Fair enough. What if I told you it was for love?" A hint of a smile appeared on the guard's face. "Depends. Tell me the story." I showed him a picture of Liz. "This is Liz, the love of my life," I said. "She left me for a guy who owns a golden coral." The guard chuckled. "Tough competition." "Exactly. I have to fly to Maine to win her back." "Fine," the guard said. "Have a good flight. And good luck with your girl." I practically sprinted to the gate. The attendant seemed annoyed as she gave me my boarding pass. My seat was in the back. right next to the bathroom. A little girl and her mom were beside me. I tried to smile, but the mom just moved the girl to her lap. I slept for a few hours, then woke up to the end of Titanic. Dumb ending, I told the girl. They both could have fit on the door. She burst into tears. Mommy, the scary man is talking to me. The mom glared at me for the rest of the flight. When we landed, I checked the address Sea Coral gave me. It was close to the airport. I just landed in Maine. Ready for my second challenge, I texted. Go to the address and use the key, he replied. The taxi driver laughed when I gave him the address. That's a rough area. It was an abandoned warehouse covered in graffiti. I unlocked the padlock and stepped inside. The room was huge and empty. I found a note on the floor. Hello, Todd. Welcome to hell. Make it to the other side of the room without dying. Good luck. Sea Coral. I stepped forward and triggered a trap. A bag of snakes fell on my head. One bit me, but it wasn't poisonous. Sea Coral wanted me to suffer. His voice boomed from a loudspeaker. Welcome to my fun house! Enjoy your stay. The lights turned red, and terrifying screams filled the room. I took another step, and an arrow whizzed past my head. I ducked and dodged more arrows. Why did he put so much effort into this? I had to keep moving. I jumped to the side, hoping to avoid more traps. Another bag fell, this time full of spiders. They crawled all over me. It was disgusting. I finally got them off and took a deep breath. This was for Liz. I was halfway there. The screaming stopped. Let's shake things up, Sea Coral's voice said. Lights out. I was plunged into darkness. The screaming started again. I curled up and cried. Then I remembered my phone. Not today, Sea Coral, I yelled, turning on the flashlight. I stepped forward and fake blood poured over me. It tasted like candy apples. Is that all you've got? I shouted. My next step almost killed me. Knives rained down from the ceiling. I jumped back, but one sliced my wrist. I cried out as my blood mixed with the fake blood. I wrapped my shirt around the cut. I was close to passing out, but I could see the doorknob. Just a few more steps. I jumped, dodged a falling spike, and reached the door. I stepped outside and cheered. I had won! I made it out alive! What's my last challenge? I texted. Someone tapped my shoulder. I turned and saw a man with dark hair and blue eyes. He looked furious. It was Sea Coral. Your last challenge, he said, is fighting me. I glared back. Bring it on. I threw the first punch, hitting him in the mouth and knocking out his front teeth. He fell back, shocked. He clearly didn't expect me to be so strong. He got up, wiping blood from his chin. You've really done it now, he whispered, pulling out a huge knife. Remembering the knives in the warehouse, I ran towards the building, hoping to find a weapon. But the door slammed shut before I could reach it. Sea Coral must have controlled it remotely. I heard him getting closer. He lunged at me with the knife, but I dodged and tackled him to the ground. I grabbed the knife and pinned him down. Tell me where Liz is! I yelled. He looked scared. Okay, you win. But before I tell you, remember this? Never let your guard down. Suddenly, he pulled a dagger from his pocket and stabbed me in the eye. I screamed in pain. I had him, and then I let my guard down. I could barely see, but I saw him struggling to get up. I took the chance to run into the nearby forest. When I thought I was safe, I fell to my knees crying. My eye was gone. How could I explain this? But I had to finish this. I had to save Liz. I used my shirt as an eye patch, grabbed a stick, and climbed a tree. Sea Coral would be coming, and I would be ready. Come out, Todd, he called. I have Liz. If you don't come out in 5 minutes, I'll kill her. Todd, do what he says, Liz shouted. You can win, Liz, I yelled. Are you okay? For now, she said. Now defeat that monster! I'm hurt. Liz, I said. I don't know if I can. You can, she said. think about our future. We'll get married, travel, have kids, don't give up. See Coral sighed. Lovely speech, Liz. Now let me finish this fight. I climbed down and ran towards his voice, but I could barely see. I felt a sharp pain in my stomach as he stabbed me. He stabbed me again and again. Any last words? He asked. Suddenly, I heard a crack. See Coral fell to the ground. Liz stood there, holding a large rock. She had broken free and killed him. Thank you, she whispered, seeing me. Oh God, you're bleeding. I thought you'd hate me, I said, my vision blurring. Never, she said, grabbing my phone. I love you. I'm calling 911. Hang in there. I woke up in the hospital a week later. My right eye was gone, and I had stitches everywhere. I was lucky to be alive. Liz's parents were furious. They thought I was the worst boyfriend ever. She could have dated a lawyer. Her father yelled. Thankfully, Liz didn't blame me, and neither did the judge. See, Coral was dead, and Liz was free. I was banned from the internet for 6 months. When I got home, there were paparazzi everywhere. I was briefly famous, but it didn't last. It's been a year now. My life is normal. I'll never go on the deep web again. The interviews paid for our wedding. See, Coral's fans still don't believe the truth. Liz's dad is slowly starting to like me. Kids think I'm a pirate. And Liz is pregnant with twins. I guess my story has a happy ending. So, the moral is stay away from the deep web. Be careful. I wasn't, and I almost paid the ultimate price. Today marks my 40th birthday on this earth, and rather than contemplating how to deal with the typical mid-life crisis, I'm deciding whether or not my time here has ended. It's sort of a family curse. For as long back as my family tree stretches, the men of the family never make it past the age of 40. It even goes as far as saying each of them have died exactly on their birthday. At least that was the case for my father. I was in the middle of college when I got the call. They'd found the athlete of a man lying dead on the front porch from an apparent heart attack. On his 40th birthday, my uncle suffered the same fate a couple of years later, as did my brother, who died about 5 years ago. Based on the evidence, I'd say there's some merit to the supposed curse, but as with every rule, there's an exception. In this case, it's my granddad. Even as a kid, I always looked up to him, not only vertically, but as a role model. In fact, our birthdays were only a few days apart, so we usually saw each other around that time. He had this aura surrounding him, like an invisible shield that prevented anything malicious from getting too close. Everything he did with purpose and with an undying smile on his face. Only once did he ever break his perfect facade at my father's funeral, but even then he seemed more disappointed than he did sad. Year zero, that's what he called his 40th birthday. For him, it marked the true beginning of his life, creating jokes about his age, claiming he just turned 5 years on his 45th birthday, and so on. Once I reached adulthood, his demeanor changed ever so slightly as he approached me for what he called some manly advice. He sat me down, handed me my first official beer, and started talking. After what happened to your father last year, I'm sure you've been thinking a lot about this so-called family curse. It's not false that all men seem to simply die on their 40th birthday. But it's wrong to call it a curse. In fact, it's more of a blessing in disguise. He took a deep breath before continuing. It's going to sound a bit crazy, but I'll tell you anyway. On your birthday, once you turn 40, a man will come knocking on your door at precisely midnight. Despite the odd hour, you'll feel compelled to let him in. Don't worry, he won't come to harm you, he just wants to talk, and once he has said what he wants to say, he'll offer you a choice. What choice? What's he going to tell me? I asked, confused as to how words could have caused all these deaths. That, I can't tell you. It's something you have to find out for yourself. All I can do is warn you and tell you to live your life to the absolute fullest for as long as you can. He never brought it up again, and though it always lingered in the back of my mind, I couldn't bring myself to actually believe it, but I did as he said and tried to enjoy each aspect of life, believing that once I turned 40, I'd surely perish like the rest of my family, which brings us to today, my 40th birthday. At precisely 12 o'clock midnight, I awoke to what sounded like 3 soft knocks at the front door. My wife, the lightest sleeper on the planet, didn't even seem to register the intruding noise, while I myself, a usually heavy sleeper, awoke with a startle. I hadn't been sleeping well the days prior to my birthday, anticipating the end of my life, yet unable to believe it. Wearing nothing more than my pajamas, I made my way to the front door. With slight hesitation, I looked through the peephole. On the other side stood a middle-aged man in a suit with a friendly smile on his face. "Mr. Shepherd," he greeted me as he shook my hand. "Mind if I come in?" Speechless, I could do little more than to gesture for him to enter my home. I'd made up my mind long ago to deny him entrance, yet I felt compelled by his presence. He walked past me and headed straight for the kitchen, seeming to already know the layout of my home, a house I'd inherited from my father. I followed him obediently into the kitchen, and we sat down at the table. He just kept staring at me without speaking a word, his smile never leaving his face. I had a lot of questions, but I couldn't bring myself to ask a single one. We simply sat in silence, looking across at each other, like an awkward and equally twisted blind date. "You seem surprised to see me," the man finally said after minutes of silence. "I'm assuming you expected my visit?" I nodded my head, still unable to speak. "Come on, Mark, you have a perfectly functional tongue. At least your wife seems to think so. Don't be embarrassed to use it." "Why are you here?" I eventually asked. His smile vanished, replaced with an expression of utter confusion. "Why I'm here? That's the question you want to start with, not who I am or what I did to your father." I didn't respond, and he stared into my eyes, not moving a muscle. "As you wish," he sighed. "I'm here to talk, to tell you the answers to each and every question you've ever had. Anything you want to know, I will tell you, no matter how stupid or bizarre of a question it is. I promise you nothing but truth." "Did you kill my father?" "Of course not. That's entirely against the rules. I simply gave him a choice, and like all the men in your family, save for your brilliant granddad, he chose to leave." "What choice?" Mr. Shepherd, or Mark, do you mind if I just call you Mark?" Before I could answer, he just went on talking. "That's the beauty of our little meeting. I will tell you the answer, but not until I believe you're ready." He leaned back in his chair and waited for me to keep asking questions, though from the smug look on his face, I could tell he knew exactly what I'd ask. "Who are you?" "Come on, Mark, you don't really have to ask that. You already know, don't you?" I had my theories, and as dumb as I felt they were, it couldn't possibly beat the ridiculousness of the family curse. "Are you Satan?" I asked nervously. "Technically, that's correct, but let's not resort to name-calling. I prefer Lucifer." He chuckled. Once again he fell silent, awaiting my next question, but I couldn't organize the thousands of thoughts flowing through my head. "You're really bad at this, you know. Not that it makes a difference. I know exactly what you want to know. You don't even have to speak. So, How about we start with something innocent? He stared deep into my eyes, digging through my brain looking for questions I didn't even know I had. You want to know if your ex-girlfriend still thinks about you? Julia, that's her name. Yes! I nodded automatically. She doesn't, and you weren't that special to her in spite of the pedestal you've put her on. You really should appreciate your wife more. She's far more suited for you. My wife, I'd completely forgotten she still lay upstairs sleeping as easy as she was to wake up. She'd surely be suspicious of what the hell I was doing awake with a strange man in the middle of the night. Could we maybe go somewhere else? My wife is sleeping, and I said before being cut off. Mark, don't be ridiculous. Your wife can't hear us. Actually, she's a really light sleeper. He stood up from his chair before screaming. Oh, Hannah! I'm talking to Mark in the kitchen. I'm just about to tell him all the secrets of the universe. And if you come downstairs, I'll tell you too. He then sat back down and listened for any commotion coming from the room. Nothing but silence. I think we're good. By then, most of the adrenaline had settled in my body, and I started to grasp the more advantageous aspect of our conversation. I could ask literally anything, and he'd answer me, but I still needed more proof he was for real. Just before my father died, he told me something I've never told anyone else. I didn't understand it at the time, but when he died the next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. He paused for a moment, giving me just enough time to doubt him. Be a better man than me, Mark, he said, but the voice I heard was the one of my father. My heart raced at the familiarity, and Lucifer just smiled in return. All doubt had been stripped away from my mind, so I decided to ask something more otherworldly. If you're real, then surely God exists as well, heaven and all that. He looked truly disappointed in my question. Oh, Mark, I'm so sorry. Sorry about what? To answer your question. Of course he's real, him and heaven and the other truly magnificent creations emerging from his holy powers, but you didn't think he actually created you, did you? He didn't. I stuttered. No, not at all. You, humanity, you're nothing more than an unfortunate side effect of God's actual creations. You really think something so horrific could be created by an almighty being? Think about it, Mark. You creatures wage war on anyone even slightly different than yourselves. You hoard all of your ultimately pointless possessions, letting some rot in poverty while some thrive beyond what's even remotely necessary. You kill for fun, and in the end you'll destroy the planet, your own home, just because you're all too selfish to take care of each other. That doesn't sound like something God would create, does it? His words sunk through me like an anchor had been attached to my soul and tossed into the deepest part of the ocean. There are good people here too. It's not all that bad. I argued. You're right. There are plenty of good people around here, but none of them are truly great. Not a single one of you is able to see the bigger picture. He stood up from his chair and started to pace around as he lectured me on the futile nature of human beings. In the grand scheme of things, nothing you ever do here matters. In the end, you'll all turn to dust, floating around in the empty void you've so affectionately called space. He finished. I felt crushed. I thought of my wife, the fact that we'd both one day die, and whatever feelings we had would be erased as the meat on our bones rotted away in the ground. Our jobs, working to provide a function for society, all of it was a pointless task, only serving to extend the inevitable end of our world. So, what happens when you die? He finished my question for me. Yeah, do we end up in hell? No, you just stop existing. The little fragment of divine power within you, the one you think is worth to be called a soul, is harvested by my workers. We need the fragments to make more desirable beings. He paused, reverting his attention towards my fridge. You'll probably need a few minutes to process. Do you have anything to eat? He helped himself to some cold chicken casserole my wife had cooked as a pre-birthday dinner. So, what do you do then, since God has left, apparently leaving you behind with the rest of us? He laughed with his mouth full of chicken, a few pieces of meat flying across the room. I didn't stay behind, I choose to remain here. Someone has to make sure you guys don't revolt. You guys keep taking things that don't belong. It's only a matter of time before you figure out how to cross over. It's actually way easier than you might think. And while I'd love nothing more than a revolution, I can't leave just anyone in charge to lead it. He dug through the casserole in a matter of seconds, loudly chewing through the meat, almost moaning in pleasure as he did. Your wife truly is a wonderful cook, Mark. Remember to thank her for me? What do you want from me anyway? I asked. I want to offer you a choice. Before I could clarify, the walls around us started to dissolve, the ground cracked beneath our feet, and every piece of furniture not stuck to the wall fell through the ground. I stood up in panic and looked at Lucifer with pleading eyes, but we didn't fall with the rest. We simply floated. It wasn't long until the world around us had been erased from existence, and we stood in a gray, empty void. What? Where are we? I stuttered. Give it a minute, he said calmly. Buildings appeared all around us, tall, modern architectural masterpieces, colored in bizarre mixtures of silver and blue, all stretching far up into the sky, so uniform, nothing deviating from its neighboring design. This is utopia, Lucifer exclaimed as we suddenly found ourselves on top of one of the buildings. There were no clouds or fog to obscure the view, meaning I could look far into the horizon, seeing that the city truly did stretch on without an end in sight. Utopia, really? Obviously not. This is my city. I made it some 100,000 years ago. It's what you people call purgatory, though I prefer to just call it the place in between, he said. You made purgatory. Yep, it's as close as humans will ever get to heaven. It's the only place that exists on the same realm at the very least. I looked around. The street thousands of feet below seemed so empty, devoid of any people. Where is everyone? In a different section? I keep expanding this place as people flow in. You see, Mark, this is what I offer you. Eternal life in this city, or to be erased by time itself. In a few decades, quick to be forgotten by the world you once lived in. Why? What do you mean, why? God might have given up on humanity before you were even created, but I still see your potential. Unfortunately, your belief in him still stopped most of you from accepting my offer, but you are just in the right state of religious mind to be reasonable. You see, I need you all to believe in the glorious afterlife described in your religious books, just not too much. I could sense the malicious intent behind his offer. If he truly offered eternal life, then surely he wanted something in return. What is this potential you talk about? We're going to take back what's ours, Mark. God sure as hell isn't going to give it to you, but I will. He smiled. Within the next second, I crashed down in my chair, back in my kitchen. Without warning, we'd returned back home. That's the choice I offer you, a chance to live in the Silver City, to have a purpose, all of eternity at the tip of your fingers. But that means you'll have to die today and come with me? What about my family? I'm sorry, Mark. but they're not ready. Most of them have been poisoned by their upbringing in religious households. Only a few of you are suitable for the job." He looked over at a clock on the wall. Time had passed faster than anticipated, and morning had just arrived. "Well, our time is up. You have today to decide. At midnight the deal expires, and you return to your short existence." He started walking out the door, but turned around to give me one final goodbye. "Oh, and happy birthday, Mark. Make sure you really enjoy this one." I felt exhausted after Lucifer left. I'd been given the ultimatum of my life. I grabbed a cooler full of beer from the fridge at 7 in the morning and sat myself down on the front porch. An hour later, and 2 beers down, I saw my grandfather strolling down the street, waving at me. He could see the look of defeat on my face and sat himself down by my side. "So, how did the chat go? You did talk to him, right?" I just nodded my head in defeat. "Why did you choose to stay?" I asked. He glanced at the cooler behind me before answering. "You got another one of those for me, kiddo?" He asked. I handed him a cold one, waiting for an explanation. "I met your grandmother when we were just 18. By then my father and his father before had both left us, so it's safe to say I was aware of the family curse. But though I didn't learn exactly what happened until much later, I promised myself I'd live life to the fullest up until my time came. I figured I would just die like all the others. So imagine how relieved I was when I was actually given a choice to stay." He took a large sip of his beer, almost finishing it in a single gulp. "But why would want to stay? If once we die, there's nothing left on the other side. If nothing here matters, then what's the point?" Who's to say it doesn't? Just because time here is limited, does that really mean it's not important? Besides, if I have to exist in a place without your grandmother, I'd rather just cease to exist. When we got married, I promised to stay by her side forever. And that's exactly what I intend to do. I looked at my granddad in admiration. 83 years of age, at the end of his lifespan, yet completely carefree, in charge of his own destiny. "What about everything else?" he said. "About God, humanity, the place in between?" He looked at me for a moment, pondering his next words. "You make your own purpose, Mark. Don't you ever forget that." We talked until my wife woke up. She made my favorite breakfast, invite both myself and my granddad inside. She showed a genuine sense of joy, and I envied her, living life in ignorance of the horrible truth. I smiled as we ate together. The first time since my meeting with Lucifer, he gave me until midnight to choose whether to stay behind and let history wash me away, or to go with him and forever live in the place in between, to serve in a war against God himself. I'll enjoy this day the best I can. After all, it might be my last. Looking back, I feel dumb. Completely stupid, actually. I should have known that apartment was far too cheap to be right, even for a studio. I should have known there had to be a catch. The day I moved in was a complete blur. I insisted that no one help me, not wanting to prove any of my family members' suspicions about my character. By late afternoon, all my muscles ached terribly and my head throbbed. I fell back on my bare mattress, staring up at the ceiling fan with glazed over eyes. I pulled the damp strands of hair from my sweaty forehead, wincing in disgust. Someone knocked on my door, causing me to jump. I cursed under my breath, pushing myself up on my elbows. 2 girls were peeking around my door frame. Foolishly, I had left it wide open, forgetting the old college rule: only leave your door open if you want to make new friends. And I was not in the mood to make new friends. One of them, an Asian girl with choppy black hair, was grinning at me. The other stood a little further back, fingering a box of Marlboro Reds. "Hey," she said, nodding at me. Her voice was smooth and raspy at the same time. "Did you just move in?" I laid back down, rubbing my face with both hands, choosing not to bother with manners. "Yeah, about 5 seconds ago." "Cool." The girls walked in, evidently ignoring my very clear body language. The girl with the black hair ran her fingers along the edge of my desk, and then picked up a little ceramic duck from my unpacked box of trinkets. "Grandma," I explained, feeling strangely defensive. "Cute," she replied, holding it up to her face. "Has anyone told you yet?" the other girl asked abruptly, looking around my apartment. She had tucked the cigarettes into the back pocket of her jeans and was now tugging at her long red braids. "Jesus, Gianna, give her a second." "Well, she needs to know." "Yeah, but we haven't even asked her name." I blinked at the two strangers incredulously. I hadn't even had time to put toilet paper in my bathroom, and here they were, touching my things and talking about me like I wasn't there. I just wanted to take a nap, honestly. "My name's Arden," I said. The girl with the red braids, Gianna, sat down next to me on my bed. "Did they tell you?" "Tell me what?" "Oh, of course they didn't. The rules." I blinked again, my face blank. I didn't know about any rules besides the typical renting ones. I had signed the lease after, at best, skimming over it. The landlord was a skinny woman who smelled of ashes, and I was fairly certain she had never developed the facial muscles necessary for smiling. I wasn't about to ask her any follow-up questions, especially when the rent was so cheap. The other girl laughed nervously. "Where did you move here from?" I ignored her. "What rules?" Gianna got a strange, wicked sort of smile on her face, bouncing a little on my mattress. The other girl sighed loudly. "Something happens here every night," she began, pulling out my rickety office chair and sitting down. "Something weird." "Like what?" I sat up, frowning at her. Finally, my interest was piqued. "Someone walks down the street," Gianna said, her voice reminding me of a camp counselor telling a scary story around the bonfire. "That one, right down there," she pointed at my window. "It's someone different each night. They scream for help for about an hour. But we aren't supposed to help them." I just stared at her. I felt a small chill run up my spine. I didn't know what to make of all this. "It happens at a different time every night," the other one said softly. "Why never know when it's coming?" "Why?" She shrugged almost sadly. "We don't know why," I scoffed, leaning my elbows against my knees. "I don't believe you." The girl shrugged. "You don't have to. You'll see for yourself." The look in her eyes made me want to believe her. She seemed sincere, but I couldn't even begin to fathom what they were saying being true. It was too strange, too outlandish. I knew this wouldn't be the nicest neighborhood, but it couldn't be that bad. It had to be a prank. They had to be hazing me or something. "We'll come back later," Gianna said matter-of-factly. "We'll show you." Before I could protest, she grabbed the other girl by the wrist, and they were gone. I followed them to the door, watching them march down the hall, talking to each other in hushed voices. I closed my door behind them. That night, as promised, they came back. They came dragging along two boys. One was somewhat muscular, wearing a tight black t-shirt and baggy jeans, and my eyes were instantly drawn to a silver heart-shaped locket around his neck. He smiled at me and introduced himself as Will when he walked in. The other boy was smaller but chubbier and nervous-looking, with a buzz cut and ill-fitting cargo shorts. His name, I was told, was Matteo. The girl named Gianna came in carrying a bottle of wine and that same slightly crumpled box of cigarettes. The other one, The girl I still didn't know the name of was the only one who looked even somewhat apologetic. They all sat down on my dusty floor next to the window and motioned for me to join them. I sat between Will and the nameless girl, unsure whether I should continue feeling violated or if I should just give in to my strange, pushy neighbors. "Do you all live in this building?" I asked, hesitantly accepting the wine when it was passed to me. "Yeah," Will answered with a grin. It seemed half-hearted. "This building is where all the young people live." "It's where they put us?" Gianna cut in, lighting a cigarette. It didn't even occur to me to tell her not to smoke inside. "We've all been sorted out." "Forgive her, she's a bit of a conspiracy theorist." "It's not a theory," she snapped, glaring at him. "Look at the other ones. Next door, the middle-agers, people with kids, but no grandkids. Across the street, old people. Not a single 20-something in that entire building!" "May, tell him." So her name was May. I looked her over, admiring her smoky eye makeup and how she'd tied her hair up, long strands poking out like exploding fireworks. "Stop it," May muttered, reaching for the wine bottle. "You'll scare her." "I'm not scared." She just shrugged at me, as if she didn't believe me. We passed the bottle around, and then around again. I listened to them bicker and laugh. It was clear they'd all been friends for a while, and I felt a little bit like I was intruding, even though they were in my apartment. Will asked me if I had gone to college, and I told him I did, but I dropped out. They all nodded sympathetically, which made me feel stupid. By midnight, I was a little bit buzzed, and my guard was beginning to fall. I had to admit, it felt good to have friends. I had already mentally resigned myself to a life of solitude, at least for a while, but it seemed that might not actually have to be my fate. I laughed at Mateo and Gianna's drunken argument, passing a cigarette back and forth with May, blowing the smoke out of my open window. I had almost completely forgotten why they were all over when it happened. All at once, a blaring alarm came from each of our phones, like an Amber Alert. I could hear the sound echo throughout the neighborhood, like an entire chorus of hundreds of phones going off, not just ours. I nearly leapt out of my skin. Not even Gianna laughed. All of them went quiet, and they looked at me as I took it out, frowning at the screen. "Dio nauti It's coming," Will whispered. He had changed, his eyes almost glassy and his voice soft and shaky. Mateo squeezed his shoulder. I looked at May. Her eyebrows were cinched together in concern, and she was stubbing out our cigarette against the windowsill, shrinking away. There it was again, that chill. It crept up my back, spreading along my scalp and making me shiver. Something felt deeply, deeply wrong. The others were quiet now, staring silently at the window I was sitting up against. The air felt somehow warmer, like it was buzzing with something. Or maybe I was just sweating. We sat there unmoving for what felt like half an hour. Right as I was getting tempted to ask what was going on, I heard it. It was far away and faint, but I still heard it. A cry. It continued as it got gradually closer, louder, more desperate. "Help, please. My God, someone help me." Slowly, I leaned out the window. I had to see it with my eyes, had to confirm there was actually someone out there, like they had said there would be. My new apartment was on the 4th floor, so it was hard to see who was down on the street without squinting. In the flickering streetlights, I could make out the outline of an elderly man. He was hunched over, wandering aimlessly from door to door, wearing only what looked like a hospital gown to cover his pale, broken body. Behind him trailed a path of dripping blood, although I couldn't see where it was coming from. "Please, I'm hurt." I looked back at the others, my mouth hanging open. "What is this?" I demanded loudly. "What the hell is this?" May touched my arm, trying to calm me down. I pulled away from her. "Arden, please, we have to help him." "Why can't we help him? He's just an old man." "We can't help him. Trust me." I ignored her, leaning further out the window, prepared to call out to him. Before I could open my mouth, I froze. The man down there was still now, facing our building. His head was tilted upwards, and I couldn't see his eyes, but I knew he was looking right at me. I immediately felt cold, like I was plummeting into ice water. "Help me?" He whimpered into the silent night air, his voice barely audible. Then he began to scream. That scream wasn't human, or at least not any human I had ever met. It was desperate, agonized. It made my stomach turn and my eyes prick with tears. I couldn't look away. The blood was coming from his arms. Or, I should say, his lack of arms. Where his arms should have been, there were only bloody, mangled stumps. They looked fresh. He didn't move other than a shaky sway, and his eyes didn't leave me. His shriek slowly molded into words that I could just barely understand. "Plas, plas, May yanked me backwards, away from the window. I landed on my ass and yelped in pain and horror. "What is that thing?" I whispered. I didn't mean to whisper, but that was all that came out. "We don't know," May replied, her eyes trained on Will, who was crying now. Mateo held on to him like he might topple over. "We just know to follow the rules." "What happens if you don't follow the rules?" I asked, and immediately regretted it. Will sobbed softly. Outside, the old man wailed. Gianna reached over and pulled the window shut, but it somehow did nothing to muffle the blood-curdling sound. "Do you want to tell her, or should I?" Mateo asked Will. Will just shook his head. He was clutching his locket now, turning the little heart over between his fingers. Mateo sighed and turned towards me. "A couple of months ago, one of them got to Will's girl, Shannon." Gianna butted in. "Her name was Shannon. Sorry, her name is Shannon." I swallowed, but whatever I did, nothing would force down the lump in my throat. "What happened?" Mateo shook his head. "We don't know. We were all together when the screaming started. Usually we just ignore it now, you know. No use in dwelling on it. But that night, we think she saw something different. She started insisting she had to help, and she ran outside. We couldn't stop her." He paused, glancing over at Will. He was silent and still. The screaming outside had begun to pass, getting softer as it continued further down the street. "Then what?" He shrugged. "Nothing. She was just gone." I pressed my lips together, trying to process all of this. I really had believed they were messing with me, but I had seen it, I had witnessed it firsthand. And it terrified me. "Why doesn't anyone leave?" He shrugged for a second time. "Can't afford it. Or people just don't care. Some people have left, but we all signed an NDA with the lease, so nobody ever knows." I frowned, thinking back to signing the paperwork, trying to remember. I could vaguely picture what he was talking about. I had just assumed it was more legal jargon that I would never understand. Had I seriously signed a non-disclosure agreement without even noticing? After that, I told them I wanted to go to bed. I needed time to process all of this. They understood, and each one of them said goodbye before leaving me alone. As I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, for some strange reason, I thought of May's face when we had realized it was happening. How she'd put out the cigarette and backed away from the window. Eventually, I was able to drift off to sleep. The next few weeks were difficult. I spent more and more time with my new neighbors. I came to find that they were right. I didn't think there was a single person older than 30 in our entire building, but I saw them all the time leaving the one next door. Settling in was difficult. The others seemed so used to it, they cared of course, it scared them. Especially Will. But you could tell they had been here a while by the way they sighed, closing the blinds and focusing harder on whatever they were doing. Eventually, I began to mimic them. It helped a little bit to pretend it was normal, as strange as that sounds. Moving out wasn't really an option for me, anyways. I was a college dropout, and I hadn't found a job yet. I was still just getting by on what I had managed to save up. Every night, it was someone different. Some were more human, some seemed less. Some were drenched in blood, their clothes ripped and strange, but some looked fairly normal. The worst were the children. They would run like injured chickens, screeching and banging on doors, begging for help. Sometimes they would try different things, say different things. Like they're coming, like I don't want to die, or even I'm sorry. There were a lot of children. One night, while I was half awake, an alarm went off. It wasn't like the one on our phones. It was blaring, only somewhat muffled by my window. My apartment glowed a flashing red from outside. I didn't even look. I was too scared of what I might see. I just covered my head with my pillow and tried to fall back asleep. I came to learn all of the theories, especially from Gianna. She thought we had all been chosen and predetermined to live here. All for some sick little government game. She thought maybe there were people betting on the different buildings, putting down money on who would interfere the least. See that, she said to me one day in the hallway, returning from a coffee run. Cameras everywhere. I didn't know if I believed her. I spent time with May, mostly. We smoked on the front steps and people watched. It was strange to see what at night was such a sinister and gruesome neighborhood during the day, bright and lively. She didn't talk much about the rules, so I didn't either. We didn't talk all that much in general. I found just enjoying each other's company. Right when I was beginning to feel comfortable was when it happened. It started with a birthday cake. Happy birthday! As May walked through the door, Matteo blew into his plastic party horn. The paper inflated, smacking Will on the side of the head. May's hand flew to her heart. Jesus Christ. You fuckers know I hate surprises. Gianna laughed and walked over to her. In her hands she held a chocolate cake, haphazardly adorned with sprinkles and bright pink icing that read HAPPYBRHDAMY in the center. 24. She set down the cake on the dresser and threw her arm around May's neck. How does it feel? Fucking awful. That's the spirit. Enough of this. Matteo cut in, weaving between them. Let's eat some cake, then let's go. Their tradition, I had learned, was to bar hop for birthdays. They told me there was no curfew here, despite the rules, just a recommended time to be home, which was 10:30 p.m. Usually, they said they got home before the alarm or spent the night somewhere else. We all took some cake. The boys took shots in the kitchen to pregame while I watched Gianna fuss over May's hair. I was never much of a partier. While at clubs or bars in college, I spent most of the time out back chatting with the smokers. But then again, I was never much of a friend group person either, so maybe the circumstances were changing. I watched them all troop outside to Matteo's car. I stuffed myself in the back, incredibly conscious of how close I was pressed into May, my other shoulder rammed into the car door. Matteo's music, cranked up to maximum volume, hurt my ears, and the tiny space was packed with the smell of tobacco and various perfumes as we sped down the freeway toward the city. But it was nice. It was really nice. I found myself laughing with them, and I hooked my arm around May's when she weaseled her hand beneath my elbow. It was actually nice. As predicted, the bars they chose weren't exactly my scene. But this time, as opposed to college, I could stand it. I took shots. I followed them out for smoke breaks. I even danced under the low purple lights until my feet ached inside my chunky heels, surely riddled with blisters. By the time we got to our third bar, I couldn't even feel it anymore. And it was at that third bar that we crammed ourselves into an old photo booth, and Gianna reluctantly offered $5 to the slot, and we laughed, red-faced, into a tiny camera. After the photos spit out into the compartment, the others slid through the red curtains, but before I could follow, May grabbed my wrist. She held me back, sliding her long baby blue nails up my wrist. I shivered. "You never gave me a birthday present," she whispered, and I could feel her breath on my face. If I was wearing my glasses, they would have been fogging up. Yeah, well, I didn't get to finish my quip before she kissed me. It was nice, and then it wasn't. "Hey!" Will called out to me, squeezing through a crowd of men wearing tattered leather jackets to get to me. "Arden! Where's everybody else?" I blinked, looking around. I could have sworn they had been right there a second ago, but now none of them were anywhere to be found. I shrugged. "Dunno. Why? What's up?" He finally broke free from the swaying mass, and I got a better look at him. He looked worried. His face was flushed, and I could see a few drops of sweat creeping out from his hairline. He took his phone out of his pocket and held it out to me. First, I saw his home screen. It was him next to a girl with strawberry blonde hair, both clutching beer bottles and grinning widely at the camera. Then I looked where he actually wanted me to. The time, 1:47 a.m. "It's getting late," he narrated. "Can we find the others and get going?" I understood then. He was worried. It was past 1 a.m. and no alarm yet. It was later than usual. The bars would start closing soon. He wanted to get back before it happened. Will and I weaved through the crowd. I was pretty buzzed, and I realized I was having a hard time moving my feet right, which made me feel embarrassed. I hadn't even had that much to drink. Was I that much of a lightweight? We found them outside, chain smoking. Will explained the situation while I swayed. The drive back was strangely tense. Matteo's music was turned down, and there wasn't any joking or boisterous gossiping like there had been on the way out. We all felt it. It didn't need to be said. Something was off. Will drove fast, almost reckless. In the dark, May took my hand, just as he was careening around the last corner, and we could almost make out the shape of our apartment building down the street. It happened. All of our phones went off at once. Gianna let out a small shriek from the other side of the back seat. "Dio nenta intrfar." Matteo turned back towards us, pressing his finger to his lips. Had this ever happened before? By their reactions, I didn't think so. It was different when I was in my bedroom, when I could just shut the curtains and put my headphones on. I felt so small and helpless then, like I was gazing into the maw of something incomprehensibly beyond my understanding. I felt like we were all flies, and this neighborhood, right now, was the spider's web. Will drove slowly now, maybe 5 miles an hour. We were all still, we were all silent. Not even a stray breath cut through the quiet. Underneath the glowing streetlights, I could make out the side of Will's face. He was pale, and if I hadn't seen his knees shifting as he pressed down on the brakes, I could have mistaken him for a mannequin. The car came to a stop. I followed his gaze all the way down the street to the dark horizon, and I saw what he saw. A silhouette. It was far too distant to make out what shape it took, but it was evidently humanoid. It moved in a shaky stumble, limping down the middle of the road in our direction. And in the overwhelming silence, I could hear it, far away but still deeply urgent. Help me. Will. Gianna hissed. Turn the car around. Will didn't move. He just stared forward, as white as paper. It didn't make any logical sense, but I knew what he knew. It was too late now. There was no use. Help me. Please help. I could tell now that it was a girl from its voice, and its figure as it got closer. It was wearing some sort of white nightgown, not unlike the old man's hospital attire from that first night, stained with dark red blood. From here, I couldn't tell if it was fresh or dry. I didn't know why that mattered to me. Maybe, May whispered. Her arm shook against mine. Maybe if we're quiet and we duck down, it won't see us. Deep down it felt as hopeless as turning around had felt, but it seemed reasonable. I nodded and did as she suggested, crouching behind the passenger seat, my knees throbbing from the strange angle I'd bent myself into. We all did it, except for Will. He didn't move. He still just looked. When he finally spoke, I could barely hear him. It was so weak. Shannon. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Matteo was the one to break the silence. What? Shannon, he repeated, finally turning to look at his friend. That's Shannon. I peered over the seat in front of me, squinting my eyes. The human-like thing was getting closer, and now I could make out strawberry blonde hair, round face, short legs, the girl from Will's phone lock screen. The girl who had disappeared. Shannon, May gasped next to me. Dude, Matteo said slowly, his words crumbling as soon as they left his mouth. I know what you're thinking, dude. Do not get out of this car. Will didn't even seem like he was with us anymore. He was in shock, I think, looking back. I have to help her, he insisted, right as another sickening cry rang out. Help me! Help! Help me, please, someone. It hurts. It was getting far too close to us for comfort, but it still didn't seem to notice the car. Its cries became more and more desperate as they got louder. I have to help her? Will repeated, and a bit of life had returned to his face. Matteo shook his head and grabbed at his sleeve. Will, that is not Shannon. Will glared at him, his eyes shining with tears. I know Shannon. That's her. I know you do, dude, and I know you miss her, but please, please don't do this. Their voices were getting louder and more distraught, and I felt May press into my side, trembling like a leaf. Gianna was whimpering, but I couldn't see her from my position. The thing was almost to our car when it stopped. She turned her head left, then right, almost like she was sniffing the air. The boys stopped arguing. I felt like my heart would burst out of my chest. I could see Shannon's face now, and I realized why she hadn't seen us. The girl's face was streaked with gore, and it looked like her eyes had been scooped out with a melon spoon. She cried, drool pouring from her slackened mouth, but no tears could come. It happened too quickly. None of us could stop him. Will violently ripped his arm away from Matteo, fumbling for the handle to the car door. Gianna screamed. Matteo tried to slam down on the lock, but he missed, and Will managed to get the door open before he could try again. He stumbled onto the asphalt and hit the ground with a soft crunch. The thing turned her head and began to scream, but instead of charging at Will, she backed away. She held her arms out in front of her, like something might attack her, whipping her head around wildly. An alarm went off, like the one I had heard that one night, but far more unbearable now that I was in it. The streetlights lining either side of the street switched to a flashing red, and Matteo threw himself into the driver's seat. The tires screeching as he peeled away. Gianna was screaming at him, pleading with him to go back. May was weeping into her hands. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. I didn't understand. As we sped away, I looked back. I couldn't help it. I saw the flash of some sort of van in the blinding red light pulling around the corner. Then nothing. That was a week or two ago. I don't know. I've been having a hard time keeping track of time. None of us have spoken much since that night. We tried the police, of course, but as you could assume, nothing came of it. I think whatever this is far larger than we know. I don't know if it's some kind of experiment or just a sick game, but I'm going to move back into my parents' house next week, despite all their berating, and then figure out what to do from there. I don't know if that was really Shannon that we saw that night, or if it was something else, and I don't know which is worse. All I know is that last night, I heard Will's voice outside my window, crying, pleading for help. I didn't interfere. My name is Dr. Aris Thorne. I am a senior glaciologist with the Institute for Climatic Studies, and this log entry marks my official arrival at the Polaris IV High Arctic Research Station. Mission objective to lead the deep drilling project, codenamed Kronos, with the primary goal of retrieving an ice core that extends our paleoclimatic record beyond the current 800,000 year limit. If our geological surveys are correct, the ice beneath us holds a continuous atmospheric history stretching back over 1.2 million years, potentially into the mid-Pleistocene transition. To analyze air from that epoch, to hold a piece of a world with a different climatic rhythm, is the entire purpose of my being here. The journey itself was a lesson in humility. The 2-hour flight from Kangerlussuaq aboard a ski-equipped LC-130 was a slow, droning ascent into a world of pure white. The transition is jarring. One moment, you are flying over the rugged, rocky coastline of Greenland. The next, there is nothing but an endless, blindingly white ice sheet stretching to a perfectly flat horizon in every direction. The station is located at an altitude of approximately 200 meters, and the moment I stepped out of the pressurized cabin, the environment made its presence felt. The air, thin and scathingly cold, felt as though it was actively resisting being drawn into my lungs. A dull, persistent headache began to throb behind my eyes, and a profound sense of heaviness settled into my limbs. The classic textbook symptoms of acute mountain sickness. It's a physical reminder that you are a foreign organism here, a fragile biological system trespassing in a realm of geological time and cryogenic stasis. The landscape is profoundly disorienting. There are no landmarks, no trees, no hills, nothing to give the human eye a sense of scale or distance. It is an environment of absolute minimalism, a white canvas that seems to absorb all thought and emotion. You are, in the most literal sense, over 400 kilometers from anything that isn't this station. The isolation is not a concept, it's a physical pressure. The station, a bastion of order in the chaos. My initial tour of Polaris IV was conducted by the station chief, Eva Rostova. She is a formidable woman with a stern, weathered face and the quiet, stoic economy of movement that speaks of many winters spent in the high latitudes. She walked me through the station, a marvel of functional engineering designed to be a self-contained world. The facility is a series of interconnected modules, a design methodology that maximizes energy efficiency and minimizes the building's footprint on the ice. The main research building is a long, linear structure containing the laboratories, offices, and a communal multi-use space that serves as the dining hall and recreation area. From there, enclosed corridors lead to the field and maintenance building, which houses the garages for the snowmobiles, the power generators, and workshops. Separate from the main complex are two housing triplexes, each containing 3 4-bedroom units with shared common spaces. Everything is designed for function over form, a compact and practical layout to support the 40 or so scientists, engineers, and support staff who call this place home during the summer season. Rostova introduced me to the other key personnel. Dr. Kenji Tanaka, the station's medical officer, greeted me with a warm but intensely analytical gaze. His office was filled not just with medical equipment, but with charts and literature on the psychological effects of prolonged isolation. He spoke at length about managing mental health, the importance of routine, and the prevalence of conditions like the winter over syndrome and polar T3 syndrome, which can cause everything from sleep disturbances to negative affect and interpersonal tension. His focus on it seemed almost obsessive, a preventative measure against the known psychological toll of living with 40 strangers in a confined space where you are cut off from the world. Then there was John Lee, the communications officer. She was young, barely out of her 20s, and had a nervous energy that seemed at odds with the stoic calm of the other veterans. She manned the comms room, a small space humming with the quiet power of satellite uplinks, our only tether to civilization. The atmosphere in the communal hall that evening was one of carefully managed cordiality. A schedule on the wall detailed mandatory social events, movie nights, weekly talent shows, and board game tournaments. It was a clear and deliberate strategy to foster a sense of community, a defense mechanism against the crushing monotony and psychological strain that this environment inevitably imposes. Everyone tries their best to make it work, to find the difficult balance between needing a friend and needing to be left alone. The rules. A glitch in the system, the final part of my orientation, took place in Rostova's small, Spartan office. She slid a single, laminated card across her metal desk. Standard station protocols are in the digital briefing packet you received, she said, her voice flat. These are different. These are specific to Polaris IV. You read them, you memorize them, you follow them. No questions. I picked up the card. It was worn at the edges, the lamination peeling slightly. The text was printed in a stark, blocky font. Polaris IV Station Specific Protocols 1. All personnel must submit to a full psychological evaluation at OR 700 on the first Monday of each month. Non-compliance is not an option. 2. All external communication must be logged and submitted for review by the comms officer. Do not mention atmospheric, seismic, or biological anomalies in personal correspondence. 3. If the station's primary alarm sounds in a 3-beat rhythmic pattern, this is not a drill. Shield your quarters immediately. Do not respond to any voice, even if it sounds like a crewmate. Await the all clear. 4. Do not leave any reflective surfaces uncovered between 0100 and 0400 local time. This includes mirrors, polished metal, and computer screens. 5. All organic samples extracted from depths below 800 meters must be handled in Lab 3 only. Lab 3's incinerator must be kept on hot standby during these periods. 6. If you experience auditory hallucinations as whispering music, report the time and location to the medical officer. This is a common symptom of polar T3 syndrome. Do not, under any circumstances, hum or repeat the music you hear. 7. If you see someone outside on the ice without a helmet and they are waving at you, do not make eye contact. Return to the main building and report a navigational beacon malfunction to the station chief. I read the list twice, a feeling of profound cognitive dissonance washing over me. My entire life has been dedicated to the rational, the empirical, the observable. This place, Polaris IV, is supposed to be an outpost of that worldview, a temple to science. Yet, the document in my hand felt like something from a medieval book of superstitions. My scientific mind immediately began to dissect it, to search for logical explanations. Rule 1 was simple, a stringent protocol for monitoring the well, documented psychological degradation that can occur in isolated, confined environments. Rule 2, while restrictive, was likely a measure to prevent panic or the spread of unverified information that could compromise the mission's integrity. Rule 5, concerning the deep, core samples, was an extreme but understandable quarantine procedure. We have found viable 15,000-year-old viruses in glacial ice before. The possibility of encountering an unknown, ancient pathogen, however remote, necessitates extreme caution. The incinerator was a logical final containment step, but the others resisted rationalization. Rule 4, about covering reflective surfaces. It had no basis in any safety protocol I had ever encountered. Rule 6 was a paradox. It acknowledged a known medical symptom, auditory hallucinations common to polar syndromes, but then attached a bizarre, ritualistic prohibition. Why not repeat the music? What could be the mechanism for harm? And Rule 7 was pure, unadulterated madness. A figure on the ice, waving, reported as a navigational beacon malfunction. It was a coded message, a piece of institutionalized denial. The rules represented a foreign body lodged in the sterile, logical ecosystem of the station. They were a system of behavior that operated on a logic entirely alien to the scientific method. My first instinct was to treat them as a problem to be solved, a cultural artifact of a previous crew's shared psychosis, now codified into tradition. But Rostova's dead serious expression told me this was not a matter for debate. First impressions and foreshadowing, my assigned quarters in one of the triplexes are small but efficient. A bed, a small desk, a locker for my gear, and a single, triple-paned window that looks out onto the same featureless expanse of white ice. The view never changes. It is a constant, silent presence just beyond the glass. Tonight, as I prepared for sleep, I unpacked my personal laptop to write an email home. As the clock ticked past 100, I remembered Rule 4. I felt a surge of intellectual indignation. It was absurd, a pointless ritual. Yet, I found myself closing the laptop lid. I then turned its polished metal casing to face the wall. I felt foolish, a scientist bowing to superstition. But beneath the foolishness, there was a deeper, colder feeling, a sliver of unease. Now I lie in the darkness, the only sounds being the low hum of the station's life support and the occasional deep groan of the ice sheet beneath me, a living glacier shifting in its sleep. I tell myself the anxiety coiling in my gut is just a predictable response to the stressors of an isolated, confined and extreme ICE environment. It is a combination of the altitude, the disorienting 24-hour daylight, and the stress of a new and demanding mission. My mind is simply acclimatizing. But as I stare into the darkness, I cannot shake the image of that laminated card. The rules are a glitch in the system, an anomaly in the data, and in my field. Anomalies are what you live for, but they are also what you fear. The work began, and with it came a fragile sense of normalcy. The Chronos drill whirred to life, its deep, resonant hum becoming the new heartbeat of Polaris IV. It was a sound of progress, a mechanical mantra that vibrated through the station's metal floors and into my very bones. Each day was governed by a strict routine. The careful calibration of the drill head, the precise extraction of each 3-meter ice core, and the meticulous process of logging, sectioning, and transporting the samples to the lab. Down in the drilling trench, surrounded by the scent of hydraulic fluid and the biting cold, I felt a sense of control. Here, the world was reduced to engineering, physics, and the clear, logical pursuit of data. The unsettling list of rules felt distant, a strange dream from another life. My lab became my sanctuary. The ice cores, laid out on the analysis tables, were like pages from a book written in a language only I could read. Each layer of ice, each trapped bubble of ancient air, was a word, A sentence, a paragraph in the epic story of Earth's climate. I lost myself in the work, the familiar comfort of the scientific method a shield against the vast, unnerving silence of the ice sheet outside. But the station itself was a pressure cooker. The forced social events, designed to combat the psychological toll of isolation, were beginning to have the opposite effect. The smiles in the communal hall seemed brittle, the conversation strained. You could feel the invisible walls going up between people as the monotony and confinement wore away at their social graces. We were 40 individuals sharing a finite amount of space and recycled air, and the initial camaraderie was curdling into a quiet, simmering tension. Dr. Tanaka watched it all with his calm, analytical gaze, a physician observing the predictable decay of a closed system. His monthly evaluations felt less like checkups and more like autopsies of our slowly eroding sanity. He'd ask about sleep patterns, dreams, and auditory phenomena with a detached curiosity that made my skin crawl. We drilled past 600 meters. The ice was pristine, a perfect timeline stretching back through millennia. Then, the first anomaly appeared. It wasn't a sudden shock, but a subtle, persistent whisper in the data. On the gas chromatograph, the methane readings, which should have followed the predictable wave, like patterns of the planet's ice age cycles, showed a flicker. A tiny rhythmic spike that was too regular, too clean to be natural. I ran the analysis again and again. The spike remained. It was a pulse, a faint but steady beat in the atmospheric record, like a metronome ticking away in the deep past. I showed the results to Evelyn Reed, my second in command. Her eyes widened as she traced the pattern on the screen. "That's not a climate signal," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "That's structured." We agreed to classify the finding, to hold it back until we had more data. Rule 2 echoed in my mind: do not mention atmospheric, seismic, or biological anomalies in personal correspondence. The rule no longer felt like a bureaucratic restriction, it felt like a warning. A few days later, the whispers in the data found an echo in the station. I was walking past the maintenance workshop when I heard a young technician, Lars, talking to his supervisor. He was complaining about a high-frequency hum coming from the drill's power conduit, a sound no one else could hear. He described it as being almost musical. The supervisor told him to get his ears checked. Later, I saw Lars leaving Tanaka's office. He looked pale. I knew he had just made a report under Rule 6. Tanaka had likely told him it was a symptom of polar T3 syndrome, a common auditory hallucination brought on by stress and isolation. A logical, scientific explanation. But I had seen the same rhythmic pulse in the ice core data. Coincidence? It had to be. My unease drove me into the station's digital archives. I began searching for information on Project Boreas, the mission that had been stationed here a decade prior. The official records were curiously sterile. They spoke of catastrophic equipment failure and unforeseen environmental challenges, leading to the mission's abrupt termination. It was all too vague. My search for maintenance logs for the old drill led me to a manifest for a decommissioned storage locker. On a hunch, I put on my parka and went out to the field and maintenance building. The locker was in a dark, cold corner, covered in frost. Inside, amidst discarded tools and frozen, solid containers, was a battered hard case. It contained a data logger from the Boreas mission, a ruggedized unit designed to store mission-critical data. I took it to Jian Li in the comms room. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the device. "Aris, Rostova's orders are clear. Boreas is a closed file. It's a piece of station history," I argued. "A failed drilling project. What's the harm in understanding what went wrong?" Reluctantly, she agreed to help. The logger's memory was heavily corrupted, the file system a wreck. But Jan was a genius. Using a low-level data recovery utility, she managed to bypass the corrupted directory and pull raw, fragmented text strings from the flash memory. They spooled onto her screen, disjointed phrases from a forgotten nightmare. Alarm pattern, not a drill, don't open the door, it knows my name, the mirror, it's not me in the mirror. He heard the music from the ice, started humming, dear God, he just walked out into the storm bowl. Beacon is not a beacon, it's a lure. The air in the comms room turned to ice. These weren't mission logs, they were a litany of horrors, a perfect, terrifying match for our own strange rules. Rule 3, Rule 4, Rule 6, Rule 7. They weren't protocols born of caution. They were desperate measures written in the blood of a previous crew. Jayan stared at the screen, her face ashen. Delete it, she whispered, her voice shaking. Now, the next day Lars was gone. Rostova announced that he had suffered a severe psychological break and had been medically evacuated. It was a clean, efficient lie. No one asked why the weekly supply plane wasn't due for another 3 days. No one mentioned seeing Lars the night before, standing at the edge of the lighted area of the station, staring out into the darkness, humming a strange, discordant melody. We all just nodded and went back to work, the unspoken truth hanging heavy in the recycled air. And then we breached the 800-meter mark. The moment the new core was raised from the borehole, a hush fell over the drill team. The ice was wrong. It wasn't the familiar, milky white or crystalline blue. It was a deep, sickly amber, and it seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. It looked less like frozen water and more like fossilized dread. We rushed a sample to my lab, Lab 1. My hands shook as I prepared a slide. I remembered Rule 5e: all organic samples extracted from depths below 800 meters must be handled in Lab 3 only. Lab 3's incinerator must be kept on hot standby. I had dismissed it as an extreme biosecurity measure for dealing with potential ancient microbes. Under the microscope, the amber ice revealed its secret. It was teeming with dark, particulate matter. But it wasn't silt or dust. As I increased the magnification, I saw them. They were complex organic structures, and they were moving. They writhed and coalesced, forming intricate, geometric patterns that seemed to defy the laws of physics and biology. They were shapes my mind couldn't properly process, angles and curves that felt alien and hostile. They were alive. A wave of cold realization washed over me, so intense it left me breathless. The methane pulse in the data. The humming Lars heard. The fragmented logs from the Borea's mission. The rules. They weren't a set of bizarre traditions. They were a containment protocol, a quarantine. And we, in our blind pursuit of knowledge, had just drilled straight through the wall of the asylum. The world narrowed to the circular view of my microscope. Inside that illuminated disk, the amber ice writhed with a life that defied every biological principle I had ever known. The dark, geometric structures pulsed in unison, their movements not random, but coordinated, forming and reforming patterns that seemed to hint at a terrifying intelligence. My blood ran cold. I was in Lab 1. The sample, the source, was supposed to be in Lab 3, with its dedicated incinerator on hot standby. I had breached protocol. We all had. My first instinct was pure, scientific reflex containment. I carefully removed the slide, my hands shaking so badly I was afraid I would drop it. I placed it back into the insulated transport case, sealed the lid, and then, for good measure, wrapped the entire case in heavy-duty biohazard bags. It was a laughably inadequate gesture, like trying to stop a flood with a paper towel, but it was all I could do. The fragments from the Borea's log screamed in my mind. The music from the ice. This wasn't a biological contagion that could be sterilized with heat and bleach. This was something else entirely. I carried the container and ran, my heavy boots clanging on the metal gangways towards Rostova's office. I didn't knock. I burst in to find her staring at a monitor displaying the drill's sensor readings. She looked up at me, and her face, usually a mask of stern composure, was etched with a profound wariness. She saw the container in my hands, and a flicker of something, not surprise, but grim resignation, passed through her eyes. "You've breached 800 meters," she stated. It wasn't a question. "The ice is alive," I stammered, placing the container on her desk. "It's full of things. They're moving, communicating." "I know," she said, her voice flat. "Project Boreas found the same thing. They called it the Amber Anomaly. They thought they could study it. They were wrong." She explained then, her words clipped and precise, that Polaris IV was not just a climate research station. That was its cover story. Its true purpose was to be a listening post, a sentinel. After the Boreas incident was covered up, a few key personnel who understood the truth established this station to monitor the 800-meter line. The Kronos project was a lie I had been fed, a ruse to get a deep ice specialist of my caliber on site without revealing the true, terrifying nature of the mission. The rules weren't a quirky tradition, they were a last-ditch containment strategy, honed from the fatal mistakes of the crew before us. As she spoke, a low hum began to vibrate through the station. It was the same sound Lars had described, but now it was everywhere, a resonant frequency that seemed to emanate from the very walls. It wasn't just a sound, you could feel it in your teeth, in your bones. It was the sound from the ice, the sound from the data, now made real. The collapse was swift. The carefully maintained social order of the station, already strained by months of isolation, shattered completely. The humming seemed to act as a catalyst, amplifying the paranoia and stress that had been simmering beneath the surface. Arguments erupted in the communal hall over nothing. People who had been colleagues for months now looked at each other with suspicion and fear. Dr. Tanaka's office was suddenly flooded with personnel reporting auditory hallucinations, but now their reports were frantic, terrified. The humming was resolving into melodies, discordant but compelling tunes that snagged in the mind. Then came the visual phenomena. Evelyn Reed, my sharp, rational second in command, cornered me in a corridor, her face pale with terror. She said she had been in her quarters and had glanced at the polished chrome of her water flask. For a split second, she saw her reflection smile back at her, but it wasn't her smile. It was wide, predatory, and wrong. She had hurled the flask against the wall, shattering it, and fled. Rule 4A: do not leave any reflective surfaces uncovered. It wasn't superstition. It was a defense against something that could look back. Panic began to set in. Jian Li, the comms officer, locked herself in her room, refusing to come out. Through the door, she screamed that every time she tried to send a message, the only thing that would transmit was the humming, arranged into complex, rhythmic bursts of static. Our only link to the outside world was now a mouthpiece for the thing we had unleashed. Later that evening, I was in the main research building, trying to work with Rostova to formulate some kind of response, when a frantic call came over the internal comms. It was a mechanic from the maintenance building. He was screaming about a navigational beacon malfunction. He said he could see someone out on the ice near the perimeter lights. Someone without a helmet, just standing there in the lethal cold, waving. My heart seized. Rule 7. It wasn't a malfunction. It was a lure. Rostova grabbed the comms handset. Negative. She barked, her voice iron. All teams, confirm navigational systems are green. There is no one outside. Repeat, there is no one outside. It was a desperate, institutionalized denial, an attempt to force reality to conform to the rules. But it was too late. The infection was spreading. I saw a geologist, a quiet man I'd shared meals with, standing stock, still in the middle of the rec room, humming. It was the same melody Lars had hummed. His eyes were glazed over, and a serene, vacant smile was on his face. People gave him a wide berth, their faces a mixture of fear and pity. He was lost to us. The entity didn't seem to kill. It converted. The final, definitive moment of collapse came without warning. A klaxon began to blare throughout the station. It wasn't the frantic, continuous wail of a fire alarm. It was a three-beat rhythmic pattern, BWO, BWOP. A pause, then again. BWO, BWOP. Rule 3. If the station's primary alarm sounds in a three-beat rhythmic pattern, this is not a drill. Seal your quarters immediately. Do not respond to any voice, even if it sounds like a crewmate. Await the all clear. Rostova looked at me, her face grim. Go, she commanded. Now, that's the Borea's alarm. It means the containment has failed. It's inside. I ran. Down the corridors, the rhythmic pulse of the alarm was a physical blow. The humming from the walls seemed to harmonize with it, creating a sickening, complex chord of pure dread. As I reached the housing triplex, I could hear screaming from other rooms, but it was quickly being drowned out by something else singing. Dozens of voices, all humming and singing the same alien melody in a terrifying chorus. I slammed the door to my quarters and threw the heavy bolts. The room was small, a metal box. My only view of the outside was a single triple-paned window looking out onto the endless, indifferent white. I leaned against the door, my heart hammering against my ribs, listening to the sounds of my world ending. Then came the voices. Aris, let me in! It's me, Evelyn. It was her voice, filled with panic and pain. Please, Aris, they're everywhere! Open the door! I squeezed my eyes shut, my knuckles white as I gripped the edge of my desk. Do not respond to any voice, even if it sounds like a crewmate. It was a test. A cruel, impossible test. The voice outside begged and pleaded, then its tone shifted. The panic subsided, replaced by the same serene, melodic humming that now filled the station. I am in my room. The three-beat alarm has been sounding for hours. The humming is constant, outside my window. In the perpetual twilight of the polar summer, I can see figures moving on the ice. They walk slowly, aimlessly, their heads tilted as if listening to a song only they can hear. They are my colleagues, my friends. A new sound has started. It's coming from the direction of the main research building, from the drill site. It's a low, heavy, scraping sound. A sound of something immense and solid, dragging itself up the 2-kilometer long borehole we so helpfully drilled for it. The rules were not designed to keep us safe. They were designed to slow this down, to give someone, somewhere, a warning. We weren't a research team. We were the fuse. And we have just been lit. The universe had shrunk to the dimensions of my small room, a metal box besieged by a world gone mad. Outside, the three-beat pulse of the Borea's alarm was the station's dying heartbeat, a rhythm that underscored the terrifying chorus of my former colleagues. Their singing was no longer just a hum. It had evolved, weaving complex, alien harmonies that seemed to pull at the very edges of my sanity. The voice of Evelyn continued to plead at my door, her words twisting from desperate pleas to soft, melodic invitations to join their choir. It knew her memories, using shared moments from our work, twisting them into lures. It was an intelligence that didn't just mimic, it violated. My scientific mind, the only tool I had left, fought against the rising tide of panic. I had to think. I had to analyze. The entity's influence was a contagion, spreading through sound and, as the Borea's logs suggested, through sight. I scrambled to cover the small mirror in the washroom with a towel, my hands shaking. I powered down my personal laptop, the polished metal back of its screen suddenly feeling like a loaded weapon. Rule 4. It wasn't about what you saw in the reflection. It was about what saw you. The scraping sound from the drill site had stopped. The silence that replaced it was somehow worse, filled with a dreadful anticipation. Then, the lights in my room flickered and died, plunging me into absolute darkness. The emergency power kicked in a second later, casting the room in a sickly red glow. But the humming, the singing from outside, it didn't stop. It grew louder, clearer, as if the station's own power grid was now its amplifier. I crept to the door and peered through the small peephole. The corridor outside was wrong. The clean, parallel lines of the walls seemed to bend and shimmer as if viewed through a heat haze. A glance showed concavity, where a moment before I had seen a flat surface. The geometry of the space itself was sick, infected. It was a place of abnormal angles, loathsomely redolent of dimensions apart from ours. My brain recoiled, a wave of vertigo and nausea washing over me. This was the entity's true power, not just to control minds, but to unmake the reality they inhabited. Survival was no longer the objective. I was a dead man in a tomb of ice. But I was a scientist to the last. My life's work had been to read the story of the past, to give a voice to the silent record of the ice. Now, I had one final story to tell, one final warning to send. I scrambled to my workstation. The station's network was compromised, a conduit for the entity's song. A direct message was impossible, but Polaris, IV, like all high-risk research outposts, had fail-safes. Deep in the system architecture was a dead man switch, a contingency protocol designed for a total loss of command. It was a system that would automatically transmit a single pre-packaged data burst if a command-level user failed to input a security code every hour. My inaction would become my final action. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my mind racing against the cacophony. I bypassed the standard communication interface, accessing the raw data logs. I had to assemble a message, a warning that could not be misinterpreted as madness. I package everything, the Kronos Project's methane data with its impossible artificial pulse. The fragmented, terrifying logs from the Borea's mission, my own log entries detailing the station's descent. I added the audio files of the humming, the seismic data from the drill, and the microscopic images of the living, geometric structures in the amber ice. It was a data scream, a coherent record of our doom. I encrypted the package and designated it as the payload for the Dead Man switch. A new sound began, a heavy, rhythmic thudding against my door. It wasn't knocking. It was the impact of something solid, something inhumanly strong, trying to break through. The metal of the door began to groan and buckle inwards. I looked at the clock on my screen. The protocol required me to miss the next check-in, which was in 5 minutes. 5 minutes until the transmission. The thudding grew louder, more frantic. Cracks appeared around the doorframe. With a final, deafening shriek of tearing metal, the door was ripped from its hinges. It wasn't one of my colleagues. It was a group of them, moving as one, their faces serene and empty. But behind them, filling the corridor, was the source. It was not a creature of flesh and blood, but a being of pure, impossible geometry. A shifting, crystalline structure of amber light and shadow that pulsed in time with the humming. It was the thing from the ice, the thing from the bottom of the world, and it was beautiful and terrible in a way my mind could not process. The sight of it was a physical blow, a sensory overload that shattered the last of my defenses. They flowed into the room, their movements graceful and coordinated. They did not attack me. They reached for me, their hands cold but not violent. The humming filled my head, no longer a sound from outside, but a vibration originating from within my own skull. The fear began to dissolve, replaced by a profound sense of peace, of belonging. The frantic, terrified thoughts that had been screaming in my mind went quiet, replaced by the serene, intricate patterns of the melody. My eyes were drawn to the dark screen of my laptop. In the reflection, I saw my own face. My mouth was open, and from it was coming the most beautiful, complex music. My eyes, which had been wide with terror, were now calm. They were glowing with a faint amber light. I understood then. The rules were not just a defense. They were a diagnostic tool, a checklist for the stages of conversion. And I had just failed the final test. My fingers, moving with a will that was no longer entirely my own, hovered over the keyboard. The prompt for the dead man's switch check-in was flashing on the screen. I could stop it. I could cancel the transmission and embrace this new, glorious reality. The universe was not what I thought it was. It was so much more. The angles were not wrong, they were just more complex, more perfect. But somewhere, in the last, dying ember of Dr. Aris Thorne, a single, defiant thought remained. A scientist's duty to the data. A final, stubborn anomaly in the new, perfect system. My hand fell away from the keyboard. The timer on the screen hit 0. And as the chorus swelled around me, and I lifted my head to gaze upon the sublime, impossible geometry of my new God, I knew that my warning was screaming into the void, a final, silent whisper from a dead man at the top of the world.